Good morning. Welcome to the ISRC training. We are so happy today to welcome Carolyn McCarthy from Have Dreams in Evanston. She's going to talk to us about structured learning. You have the Task Galore book for each team. We're going to have a make and take this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming her.
Oh, I better turn this on. I'm not used to being mic'd up, so. Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy I'm here on Potato Bar Day. That's exciting. My name is Carolyn McCarthy, and just a little bit about my background, and I'll talk about Have Dreams as well. And then I want to survey the room just a little bit before we get started. So I started off as a general education teacher teaching third grade. In that time period, I was really interested in working with students one-on-one. I really liked that connection I was having with students and seeing them grow and succeed. And so I made a shift to going into special education. So I got my LBS 1, and then I worked my first special education job at a private therapeutic day school. And that is when I first learned about structured teaching. I had never heard of it before. They didn't talk about it in grad school. It was very heavily like ABA focused and some other methodologies. So when I learned about structure and put it in practice, it was something that I was just blown away about. And that's when I first also was introduced to Have Dreams. So if you haven't heard of us before, we are a nonprofit autism resource agency that was founded in 1996. And we were founded by some parents and teachers that were looking for programming for students on the autism spectrum that needed something to do after school. There wasn't a whole lot that they were able to do and participate in. And so we started off having after-school groups meeting once a week in the Park Ridge Ice Rink. That was the space that they had. And then from there, of course, our program has grown. So we have our Park Ridge location, which is where we offer our We Dreams after-school programs, teen groups, and clinical services. And then we also have our Evanston site, which is where we do the majority of our trainings. And it's also where we have our life skills program, so our adults that have transitioned out. They have a day program there. We also have our Have Dreams Academy there, which is a big push that Have Dreams has right now, is focusing on employment for our people on the autism spectrum. In our Have Dreams Academy, it is an internship program that our participants go through, and they are seeking competitive employment. So anything you or I could apply for is what they are also applying for, but they're learning on-the-job skills, soft skills, all of those things that they need to know in order to be able to not only interview and get the job, but also keep the job. And so I always like to remind everybody that maybe if you're working with preschoolers right now, still the skills that you're working on are something that they will take with them for the rest of their lives that they need to have for employment. And that's something that structured teaching also helps to support. I think sometimes it is commonly thought of as for younger students, when in fact our adult programs are also still using structured teaching. It just looks different, but the methodology stays the same. So that is a little bit about Have Dreams. And then I just wanted to take a survey of the room as far as age groups is what you're teaching. So who here is teaching or working with elementary ed school students? Majority. Okay, how about middle school? High school? A few? Okay. Early ed? Okay. And then as far as related services goes, do I have speech therapists? OTs? PTs? Social work? Okay. Okay, great. So hopefully this training is something they'll be able to take with you. Our Make and Take this afternoon has some adapted books that you can bring back to your rooms that you'll be able to use, adapted games, and some group activities too. So you'll be able to pick one and take that with you. And then also, as Sherry mentioned, you have these Task Galore books, which we'll talk about this afternoon as well as to how to use them. But it's a great resource going back if you're like, I don't know where to start. This is a good place to start for you. So today's training, we will cover autism. It's my understanding that I know many of you, the population is for students that are deaf and hard of hearing, but also that may have a dual diagnosis of autism. Autism is my expertise. I would say my expertise is not working with students that are deaf or hard of hearing. However, I did have the opportunity to go and observe some classrooms a couple weeks ago, and I would say the same principles apply for what we're using for students on the autism spectrum as well. So hopefully there's a lot of takeaways that you'll be able to use. So we'll cover autism, not to say that you don't know what it is, but more so that we are all in the same playing field as far as what we're talking about and how structured teaching is geared towards students on the autism spectrum. We will talk about structured teaching in great depth, starting off with the structured teaching pyramid and breaking that down, talking about why it works. We'll talk about activities and how to structure them, so even communication activities are going to be things that we're going to make visual so that our students have an understanding of what is expected of them. And then we'll talk a little bit about inclusion and pushing into gen ed for your students that do push in. And then behavior is one that we cover at the end, but really we're covering it the entire day because everything we're using in structured teaching helps to shape behaviors. Because essentially what structured teaching does is it provides those supports so that students know what the expectations are of them, what the rules are in a visual way, and so then it speaks to their language or their support system. So jumping in, starting off with autism, what is it? It's a developmental disorder that impacts the structure and functioning of the brain. And this is a big takeaway that we want everyone to have, is that this is something that's happening neurologically. I think oftentimes it is considered a behavior disorder, and that is not the case. This is something that's happening neurologically in the brain. We know this from a lot of research that has been ongoing and continues to go, that this is something that can affect a student's communication, social interaction, and sensory processing. And those are the top 3 core characteristics when it comes to someone on the autism spectrum when they're getting those diagnoses. But there are a few more things as well that are those characteristics that also can affect behavior, communication, and social skills. We know that autism occurs on a spectrum. So as the saying goes, if you've met one person with autism, you now know one person with autism. It can really range as far as where their skills are, communication-wise, socially, academically. Really, there is no 2 students that are the same that are on the autism spectrum. But when we get into structure, you'll see how those supports help anyone that's on the autism spectrum. Some additional diagnoses that are commonly comorbid with autism that aren't as often talked about. First one being epilepsy. So that's anywhere between 25 and 40%, especially for those in those middle school range. We do see an uptick with seizures and epilepsy happening around 11, 12, 13 years old. And that is something that is there, as well as GI disorders. So you may have some students that are on a specific gluten-free, casein-free diet, things like that. And that is not to cure their autism necessarily, but they are finding in their research that many of our students on the autism spectrum have an increased amount of gut flora in their system. So certain foods that they're eating are causing inflammation or pain and discomfort, and so having a diet like that can ease some of the pain, also reducing some of the behaviors that we might be seeing. Sleep problems. I know many parents have said that they wish that once they got the diagnosis of autism that somebody would have handed them a bottle of melatonin because our students can really, I'm sure as you've experienced, can be on opposite sleep schedules from our neurotypical culture. So they might be sleeping in your classroom during the day because they're up all night. And then there's other psychiatric conditions that are sometimes a challenge for us to filter out as to what is their autism and what is, the ADD or what is their anxiety or depression, because you can see that number is really high, 85%. Really, and we'll talk about this at the end of this slide as well, but anxiety and overstimulation are really the 2 biggest core characteristics and driving factors when it comes to behavior for a student with autism. They're having anxiety over what the expectations are. They're having anxiety over their social skills and who they have to interact with. They might be having anxiety over communication and maybe not having confidence in their communication skills or that they're going to say something right, which is also that social piece. And then, of course, overstimulation as well. So we're very in tune with sensory in the classroom, I think, and making sure our students are regulated as much as possible. Some older diagnoses that we know and have heard and have encountered as well is Asperger's and PDD-NOS. If you've met people that have been diagnosed with Asperger's, they'll tell you they have Asperger's. And that is now more under the DSM-5. It is now considered high-functioning autism. So we've widened that umbrella. It's no longer a separate diagnosis on the DSM-5. However, I have been informed that some clinical services are not using the DSM-5, and they're still diagnosing students with Asperger's. So that's just something to be mindful of as you encounter it. As well as PDD-NOS was something that was diagnosed for our younger students before they got to that autism diagnosis initially. So that was also removed from the DSM-5.
What would you consider that as a diagnosis then if they have PDD?
Well, there might be sensory processing disorder, or it could be, sorry, the question was, what would you consider that being if it's no longer PDD-NOS, what is it called? It could be sensory processing disorder. It also could be still autism. It's just like they haven't done the testing for it. Yeah. And this is just a brief slide to tell you the current autism prevalence rate. It just came out this year in 2023. We get new numbers, it seems like almost every year. It is now currently 1 in 36 nationwide. In Illinois, they think it's roughly 1 in 51. So, some people are alarmed that there is this, epidemic that is happening with increasing all of the autism diagnoses that's happening. But there's a few reasons as to why we're seeing that increase, and we'll get into that. But one of the ones is that we're actually able to diagnose females better than we ever were before. Many females were able to mask their symptoms better. In the classroom, they were not presenting the same as the males were. So the numbers used to be 5 to 1, male to female. It's now closer to 3 to 1, male to female. So we are definitely seeing an increase in that. We are also finding an increase in our clinical services of a lot of later in life females being diagnosed.
Can I ask you a question? Is
Yes.
this 1 in 36 children or 1 in 36 adults and children?
Nationwide, yeah, it's adult, yeah.
All populations, okay.
I think they did a survey of like age 8, I want to say, and up. Yes, so we are finding an increase as well as adults like later in life getting that diagnosis, whether it's because their children have been diagnosed, and so they are seeing similar symptoms, or maybe it's they haven't had solid relationships their entire life and they're not sure why, or they have not been able to hold a job, things like that. So we are definitely seeing that more in our clinical area as well. So a few reasons why we are seeing this increase, not the only reasons, but one of the big ones is that we've widened our spectrum, right? We no longer are doing Asperger's, we're no longer diagnosing PDD-NOS. It's now under one big autism umbrella. So clearly we would see an increase in that because they're no longer separated. Another piece is that we have a greater understanding of autism among the population. We're better at diagnosing it. So there was many southern states that were not diagnosing as much because they were more rural. They did not have the same resources that we had in city areas and things like that. We've now increased the ability to diagnose more students in more areas and more children in more areas. Even coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that came out of that, so I don't know if you're familiar with the ADOS, if you've ever seen it done before. That is like the gold standard of diagnostic tool that is used for diagnosing autism. The same people who created the ADOS, Kathleen Lord is actually one of our founders at Have Dreams. They also created during the pandemic the BOSA, so they were able to diagnose remotely autism as well. So the ADOS, if you've never seen it done before, is a kit that comes and it has books and toys and it has a whole script and it's 4 different modules that you follow when you are diagnosing the students, and they are scored on a scale compared to a neurotypical student. The BOSA also is a kit that has specific scripts, toys, books, and things like that that parents use, and a clinician is able to watch remotely, virtually through a screen to see how they interact with those things, and they're still scoring it as well. So for many students that were in families that were not able to get into places to get the diagnosis, this is something that has also increased that ability to be able to happen. Yes? Mm-hmm. BOSA, yep. So we talked about neurologically how it is something that is happening in the brain. This is an actual image. On the left side is a neurotypical brain, and on the right side is a brain of someone with autism. And you can see a real physical example of an increased cerebral spinal fluid in their brain. So for anyone that says this is a behavior disorder, you can find an image like this to show them this is something that's happening neurologically. As far as causes go, we know that there's a whole range out there of what people are saying is causing autism, and we're currently going by what we know research-wise. There was a study that came out in 2019 out of Sweden that said that autism is 80% genetic and 20% environmental. So, when there's a variety of different theories out there, such as vaccinations, as well as refrigerator mothers, if you've ever heard that term, that the mother was so cold to their child that the child never warmed to them, and so then they have autism because of the mother. So there's lots of blame that was placed on the parents, even including in utero. The mother ate too much mercury. There was a variety of different blame that was put on the parents, and really we're finding that it's genetic. So it's something that's happening in the gene, and there's a variety of different research even to looking at DNA and the genetics. There's specific genes for hand flapping. There's specific genes for verbal, nonverbal behaviors and things like that. So this is something that we definitely are seeing neurologically, and there's tons of research out there, but vaccines is not one of those causes that we're seeing. So here's the autism iceberg that you will see quite a few times, and I would encourage you every time you see it to cue in. I know teachers sometimes have a hard time sitting still and listening, especially in special education, because we're so used to running around the classroom. But if you see this, this is something where we want you to pay attention a little bit. This is how we look at behavior. When you think about an iceberg, an actual physical iceberg, what we can see when we go to see those icebergs is just above the waterline. There's just the top of it. And then underneath the water, the iceberg can go miles deep, right? It can be huge. We have no idea how big it is. That's kind of how we look at behavior. When we see specific behaviors from a student with autism, it is our job to play detective, to go underneath the waterline to figure out what's happening and what's driving this behavior. So when I get called in for home consultations or school consultations to look at behaviors, this is what I'm looking at. What's driving the behavior? I'm not going to try and replace the behavior, because I think we've all experienced when we replace behavior, sometimes we get something even worse, right? So I'm not going to try and replace it. I'm going to figure out what's the antecedent, what's causing this behavior. Is it something socially that's happening? Is it communication? Is it sensory? Is it a learned behavior that they do, and now we have to shape that behavior because it's a routine that they've built? Is it measured IQ? Or is it motor skills? Or is it a variety of these, coupled together? So that's really what I look at when we're talking about shaping behavior. So we're going to break down some of these core characteristics for autism as we refer to it as a culture. So we refer to autism as a culture. They have a specific culture of their own, people with autism. And it is our jobs, essentially, as educators, to be cross-cultural interpreters. We understand the neurotypical world and culture when we also understand the autism culture. And so we have to try and help our students to understand the neurotypical world and culture a little bit better. So on some of these slides that you will see, on the left side there will be a quote. And these are quotes that we've gotten from our Have Dreams participants. So our participants that are adults on the autism spectrum that are seeking competitive employment. We asked specific questions about communication and sensory and social skills, and we got some answers. This first quote, "It's like a secret language everyone understands except me when we talk about communication." So how many of you have ever tried to learn a foreign language before? So I have too. I learned French in high school, and it's been completely useless to me. However, I think if you were to drop me in France, I would probably be able to get around looking at signs, picking up on certain words, to try and understand a little bit about where I was going or what it was that I was needing to do, right? And we kind of look at that as our students when we're talking about verbal processing. We don't really understand receptively how much they're really taking in. So we can assume that they're taking in little bits and pieces, right? And so sometimes that communication can be overwhelming to process for them, and so that's why we want to pair everything with a visual, because we know our students on the autism spectrum learn better visually versus auditorily. So in that environment, we can still read social cues and navigate the environment. Body language is something that's really hard for our students to be able to interpret, so that's something that we have to really spell out for them. And then given those receptive difficulties, it makes sense that expressively our students are not going to be as confident either. They're going to have a harder time communicating with us because they're not really always sure what's going on. So there's a variety of different research out there when it comes to communication. But if you give a verbal direction, you need to give someone with autism between 20 and 40 seconds to process that information. That's how slow their auditory processing time can be. No one, I think, currently in our classrooms in this day and age has 20 to 40 seconds to sit in silence and wait for the student to process that information, which is why you will hear me say you need to add visuals to everything it is that you're trying to get your students to do, because that helps them process it faster. Also, additionally, if you find that you repeat yourself after giving that one verbal direction, your students start back at 0 processing that information again. So if you find that you're constantly repeating yourself and your students still aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, you should probably think about pairing a visual with that. And that's not just giving directions like push in a chair, but even in instruction. When you are giving instruction academically, you want to make sure you have visuals to support what it is you're trying to say so that your student can process it faster. When it comes to communication, our students can have a real concrete understanding of language. So we want to make sure that whatever auditory information that we are giving, that it is clear and concise. Something like sarcasm can be completely lost on our students on the spectrum. They really don't understand it. And they take you for your word. So they have a very strong literal sense of the word. They can have a lack of meaning, especially in concepts. So, thinking about today, it's an extreme example, but if I were to say it's raining cats and dogs, you might have one student that looks out the window expecting to see cats and dogs coming down. That's how literal some of our students can be when it comes to language. And then you've probably also experienced echolalia and borrowed language. So echolalia being that they repeat the last few words that you say, or borrowed language being that they're scripting something from a movie, maybe from a TV show or a YouTube video, and sometimes it's even in the appropriate context, right? But it's something borrowed, it's not their own generated thought. Thank you for your patience. All right, so this next video we're gonna watch is a clip from the Temple Grandin movie that came out in 2010 from HBO. They put out a movie. It's Claire Danes is playing Temple Grandin. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with who she is, but if you are not, she is essentially one of the first people with autism to be able to articulate what it's like to have autism. She does go on tour and comes to Chicago very often, so if you have not had the opportunity to see her, I would highly suggest that you do. But anyway, so she is originally from the East Coast, and at this point, this in the movie and in her life, is when she comes to Phoenix, Arizona. She's going to work on a ranch and her aunt's farm. And this is the first time that she is greeting somebody on the ranch. So I'm going to hook up the microphone to the speaker so you can hear it. But we're thinking about communication, so keep that in mind as we're watching this quick clip.
Say hi to your Uncle Mike.
Hi, Temple. I just been telling Billy here all about our summer visitor.
Are you a cowboy?
Excuse my niece. That's not how we greet people, Temple. You know better than that.
Hello, I'm Temple. It's very nice to meet you. Hello, I'm Temple. It's very nice to meet you.
I apologize, there's not closed captioning. That is a project I'm working on this year, so it is coming. However, so when we're talking about communication, what did we notice with Temple Grandin? So when she first met people, she did what? She said what she's thinking. So she blurted out, right? So oftentimes for our students on the autism spectrum don't have that filter. It's not there, it just comes out, right? Because socially they're not thinking about it, they're just thinking what's on their mind. And we even saw her flash through pictures. So Temple Grandin wrote a book, it's called Thinking in Pictures. It's a short read, so put it on your summer list if you haven't read it yet. But you can see she flashes through all these pictures and then she puts that information together and then she blurts out, "Are you a cowboy?" As soon as she said that, then she was corrected. And then what happened? We're still thinking about communication. What did she do? Yep, she fell back into her script, right? She said, hello, I'm Temple, it's very nice to meet you, right? And then we get that robotic piece. So we either have the no filter where they're blurting out, or we have the script that we've given our students. And so that's oftentimes what we see in a lot of our communication. Let's see if we can keep this going. Okay. So then when we think about that communication piece, it's obviously going to affect our social relationships as well. So when we think about culture of social skills, and the quote is, it feels like everybody else is in a parallel dimension. I can see them, but I'm not with them. So now we're speaking a secret language, and they're in a parallel dimension. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the glass jar effect, where somebody, they said essentially what it is like they're looking through a glass, someone with autism said, it's like they're looking through a glass jar, and they want to be with everybody, and they can see everything, but they just don't have that ability to get through. So it's this parallel dimension and secret language that our students automatically, without anything that we've done specifically, this is how they're feeling. So if we think about in childhood, at the playground, at recess time, all the students are playing except maybe the student on the autism spectrum. So what do? We try to jump in and get them to play with some of their neurotypical peers and get them to socially model, and we do different things like that. But for some of our students, they might need that time to decompress. They might need that time to be alone because they're keeping everything together in the classroom. So thinking about that anxiety piece. They don't want to blurt out the answers. They don't want to say something wrong. So they're keeping everything in. So when they get to recess, they might need that time just to breathe, right? There's somebody that I work with, TJ, who has graduated from our academy, and sometimes he comes with me and does trainings and talks about what it's like to have autism. And he said at work, he oftentimes gets asked out by his coworkers to go to happy hours and things like that after work. And he said quite often he declines. And it's not because he doesn't want to be invited. It's not because he doesn't want to go. But he is keeping it in all day long. But by the time he gets home, he said he sleeps 2 or 3 hours because he's just exhausted. And that's the reality for someone with autism, and that's how they feel. And it's not that they don't want to be invited. It's not that they don't want to be included, which sometimes I think people say, oh, they're in their autism bubble. That's not the case. It's the fact that they physically cannot push themselves that much further. They need that time. And I think sometimes we can identify with that, right? I mean, sometimes we come home from a school day or we get in the car and we're just like, whew, just need that minute, whether you listen to radio. I think sometimes I don't have the radio on and I don't even realize it till I pull in the driveway because your thoughts are so loud. So we just need to be mindful of that too when we're thinking about social skills and how much we want to push it on in a place like the playground too. So when we're talking about autism culture and socially, here's some 4 areas that we need to be mindful of and things that we have to really teach. We can't just assume that our student knows it. We have to teach it. So one being unwritten social rules. What are some unwritten social rules? Looking at someone when you're talking to them. Mm-hmm. Yes, physical space, personal boundaries, right? I mean, I think during COVID, we got really good at measuring that 6 feet, but we really, that wasn't natural for our students, and we had to show a visual probably to say, this is my space, this is your space. Right. What are some other unwritten social rules? Not oversharing. Right. You don't want to hear about everything that, your cat ate or something like that. Yeah, that's true. We're not oversharing. Yes. Yes, that is a big one, and we talk about it in social reciprocity as well. Turn-taking in conversations is not something that comes naturally for our students and something that has to be practiced every day. Good. Even things like body language. Oftentimes our students don't understand, when your arms are crossed, what that means. And so that's something that we have to spell out for our students so they have a better understanding of those unwritten social rules. Another thing is theory of mind. Have any of you ever heard of theory of mind? Anyone want to share what it is? So it's being able to take on somebody else's perspective or somebody else's thought. So that's something that our students really struggle with, and so that, of course, is going to affect their social relationships. Of course, it's going to affect their communication, right? Is being able to take on what somebody else is that they're playing with or who they're talking with. And so we did an experiment And the first part is actually my two daughters during COVID, so my camera work is terrible. So I apologize for that. It's just using on a cell phone. But the first part, we did the experiment with my neurotypical daughters. And then the second part we did with someone in our autism program in our teen group, Glenn. So let's take a look. Do you want some M&Ms? Mm-hmm. Here you go.
Sure.
Open them up.
How do you open? What is... Right?
Right, let's try and trick Georgia. Call Georgia over and offer her some M&Ms. See if she wants some M&Ms. Call her over.
Georgia, want some M&Ms?
Okay. Georgia,
Want some
come
M&Ms?
here.
Want some M&Ms?
You want some yummy M&Ms?
Take them.
Here, come over here.
Come here. Want some? Give it to her.
Right. Here, have some M&Ms.
You can't get them. Here's a big shot. You really got me. I can't. Want one?
What's in there?
She's trying to pull it out.
Need help?
Need help? Pasta noodles.
What do you think is in the box?
Raisins.
Crayons.
I'm gonna go get somebody. And we're gonna put the markers back in the box. What do you think they're gonna think are in the box, Glenn?
Crayons.
Let's find out.
Okay, so the main difference being that once Ella learned that there was M&Ms, there was pasta in the box, she was in on the joke, right? So now she knew that Georgia was going to think, she was able to predict that Georgia was going to think that there's M&Ms in the box, right? So then she was in on the joke to trick her sister. So then when we watched Glenn and Sue presented the raisin box, he said he thought there was raisins in there, and he opened it up and there was crayons or markers in the box. He then, when she asked him, he then just assumed that everybody else knew that too, that everybody knew that there was going to be markers in this raisin box. So he wasn't able to take on someone else's perspective, and that's that real difference, and that's going to affect our social relationships. Another piece that's going to affect social relationships is joint attention. So thankfully, I don't see as many goals as I used to when it comes to eye contact. I think when we're setting up our students to make eye contact goals, we're setting everybody up to fail. There's someone famous with autism that said, do you want me to look at you or do you want me to listen to you? Because I can't do both. And by the way, this is also very true for any of our neurodiverse learners. So not just our students on the autism spectrum, but others as well. It is really hard for them to process that information while they're looking at you, whether it's socially, they get that engagement and that's all they can focus on, or they think they have to look at you and so they can't think about anything else. That's something that we have to be mindful of. So what does joint attention tell us? What does eye contact tell us as a culture, as a neurotypical culture? Why do we want eye contact? It shows we're listening, right? And we're participating. So for our students, we have to come up with another way for them to be able to show that they're listening and show that they're participating. That doesn't require that eye contact necessarily. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't teach students to look at people and say hello or greetings, things like that, because we also have to be mindful of our neurotypical culture and how we want our students to understand how to function in that neurotypical culture, especially when they're going to get a job and giving interviews. People want that eye contact. So it's something that a skill that we have to work on, but we also have to be mindful of. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're hearing anything that we're saying. So joint attention also is going to affect our social relationships. And then we get into social reciprocity. So that back and forth exchange between people, whether it's a conversation or playing a game, that is something that also does not necessarily come naturally to our students. And so here is another video. Hopefully it'll work. This is Georgia, who you saw earlier. She is a neurotypical 4-year-old. So you're going to see how she responds when she gets a new toy. And then you're going to see Jason at our Have Dreams after school program. He is also 4 years old, and how he responds when he gets a new toy.
Hey, Georgia, I have something for you. Let me show you. I got the closure.
Wait, come back, come back.
What? What?
Open it up.
Okay. So I open it. Here, come sit down. How do I open this? Can you help me?
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Here you go.
Can I crack it? And it's Dolly. He's so cute.
What's she
Yeah.
going to do? Is she play with them, or what's she going to do?
I'm gonna
Wait,
go
come back.
I'm telling Ella.
Okay, and then come back.
Mommy, you get something for Ella too?
Yeah, just a minute.
Okay.
Okay, sit down. Are you going to play with her? What are you going to do?
She's gonna play Cash Rocket with this girl. Tennis. I'm not ready yet. Okay, now I'm ready. Okay, I'm waiting. I'm ready now. Okay, ready? Ball! Top!
Okay, before we watch Jason, what were some social things that you saw Georgia do? Get going in anticipation. What else?
Wants to share it with somebody.
Yes, she wanted to share it immediately with her sister and show her what she got, and her sister didn't. What else did she do?
Just asking if her sister gets a present.
She asked if her sister got one too, so she was thinking about her. It happens sometimes. What's that?
She asked for help opening it.
She asked for help to open it. And then at the end, what did we see? They play, they put together, and they put some sort of tennis game together, right? And so that's something that just happened naturally that she did, that nobody was teaching her to do. So now let's watch Jason in our Have Dreams program and what he does when he gets a new toy.
Come here, I want to show you. Here, There is something special I want to show you. Come here, quick. Okay, come on in here. I want to show you. Look at this. Look what I have. I have this very special remote control car.
I want to have it. A broken Kroger. Let's think. Let me see that. Is it working? Let's see. It went backwards. I'll get it.
Ready? Hey, come over here. Here, over here.
What do we see? Oh. What is that? Let's go over here. Oh.
Okay, what were some social things that you saw Jason do?
When she introduced it, he said, I want to have it.
When she introduced it, he said, I want to have it.
I want to have it.
Yeah. His affect stayed the same? Yeah, he was pretty neutral, right? But he would go, oh, oh, right? Occasionally you could tell he was excited. Yep. Anything else social that you saw him do? Mm-hmm.
Sounds like that borrowed language. Let me see.
Yeah, borrowed language. Yeah, that's a good point, where he's like, let me see. Right. He wasn't quite sure. Mm-hmm.
Well, for me, it looked like he was more analytical with his thought.
I'm sorry, say it again.
He just appeared to be more analytical with his thought.
Yes, more analytical. He's processing it a little bit more. Yep, trying to figure out what he's supposed to do with it. Yeah. So, I mean, he didn't do anything wrong with playing with the car. He looked great. Some of us, we might be like, that would be great if my student would do that, right? Because we've seen other things happen with cars. But it could be better, right? It just didn't seem natural for him. He wasn't sure what to do. A lot of the language he was giving, he was kind of directing it to nobody, right? He was just talking into the air, like talking out loud or thinking out loud. And that's something that we would really try to shift and change, is try and get him to communicate to us. You know, ask us specific questions, whether it's handing us a card, a question card, or things like that. But we're thinking about that social piece of it. He didn't sit down and say, like, let's build a racetrack for this car, or let's stack up some blocks and knock them down. Like, he wasn't quite sure how to interact with the car beyond Sue showing him what to do, and, you know, it fell off the table, and we did hear him say, I'll get it, you know, things like that. But we'd really want to shape that a little bit more to get more interaction. Okay, so continuing underneath the waterline, the next thing that we will take a look at is sensory. And that's something that I think that we're pretty in tune to when it comes to hypersensitivity in the classroom. So many classrooms I go into now have those blue light covers. I'll see students, maybe they're wearing headphones, they've got squeeze vests, weighted vests, heavy lap things, fidgets, all sorts of sensory things, including sensory rooms, to try and help meet our students' sensory needs, right? So that's something we're really in tune to in the classroom. On the opposite end of that hypersensitivity, there's also hyposensitivity, and that's something that is a little bit trickier to tackle. If you've encountered it before, it's really a student that doesn't feel anything at all. So that's oftentimes where we see things like tapping, where they're trying to get a sense of the space, or pacing back and forth of the room to get an understanding of the environment, or unfortunately headbanging is one that we see quite often because it's meeting a sensory need that they're having, and that's one that we really haven't quite figured out how to tackle too much. I have no OTs in the room right now, but if this is something that you are facing, I would recommend working with your OT on getting some vestibular engaging activities, because that is something they found that can help, that if they can bring some awareness to the core, that can help them be more centered and focused and feel more regulated. So the quote for sensory is, everything was scary and hurt too much. So our students tend to feel their sensory, all 5 sensory areas, at least 10 times more intensely than we do. So a light tap to us might seem like a light tap, and for some students that can cause pain. So that's how intense some of it can be for many of our students. So we have to be mindful of that piece of it. We also know that our students can tend to fixate on certain sensations. Again, our middle schoolers and high schoolers, as we get older, they're trying to, it serves a purpose. I was actually in a classroom yesterday where the student, he was tapping everything. He was tapping the table, he was tapping, you know, it would have been like the projector, he would have been tapping the screen, and he wasn't trying to aggressively hurt anything, he was just tapping everything. And they said they've tried to replace it, but they can't. And I said, well, it's serving a purpose. There's a reason he's doing that tapping, and whether it's because he needs to cope with something, because oftentimes what we see, it's a coping mechanism. It filters out some unpleasant sensations that our students are experiencing. So that is something that we always have to be aware of too, is that sensory piece, which I do, like I said, I think we are pretty in tune to that. We talked about the hyper versus hyposensitivity, and then also our students, we know, can be really monochanneled on specific sensations or specific things. Or even if they wear a pair of pants that they've never worn that day and it has a tag on it, that ruins their day, right? I've worked with adults that they constantly taking off their shoes, so a solution is that parents buy, or their caregivers buy them like those Converse high tops and tie them really tight. Well, that just makes them crazy all day because they want to get those shoes off and they can't. So it's something that they will focus on constantly. Also, thinking about sensory in the classroom, we have this video, and this is Tiny. He has twin boys that are both on the autism spectrum, so that's something you'll see as well, is that multiples, it's like, I think the number's around like 70% more likely that at least one of the multiples will have autism these days. And so here is Tiny talking about at home what that sensory looks like.
Early on, the boys were, my twins were just really fascinated with letters and numbers, and before they could in any way, shape, or form communicate, both of them could say all the alphabet, all the sounds associated with the alphabet, know all the numbers up to about 30, before their second birthday, and they're not verbalizing anything else except for letters and numbers. And they love to sit with books and love to whatever, but we came to realize that that was like a coping mechanism that they had, not really, it was a way they were easily overwhelmed, by what went on, and they would retreat into books, and it's not necessarily in a positive way, and it's, both Peggy and I place a very high priority on education, and so saying to us that you're going to have to take some of the books out of the house and limit their access to books that was a really difficult thing.
So sometimes those sensory needs are not like those physical ones that we see. Sometimes it's a coping mechanism like retreating into books and things like that, as Tiny's talking about, that helps serve a purpose and a need for our students. So again, when we're thinking about behavior, if you have a student who lines up cars in the leisure area, that could be a way that it's helping them cope with something, right? It's meeting some sort of need for them, whether it's visually they need to see something or tactily they are doing it, because it's serving a purpose. So when we take away things like that, we're taking away a way for them to cope with things, and so we have to be able to offer other opportunities and different types of things for them to be able to cope. So then we talk about behavior, which is always a hot topic in behaviors, but the quote is, "In an uncomfortable situation, I just leave without saying a word." So this is an adult that says that, they just leave, and I think some of us probably could identify with that now too, is that we would rather just leave. But if you think about your students who elope, like during assemblies or specific classrooms, things like that, again, it's serving a purpose for them. There's a reason. They're communicating something to you that they cannot be in there. Behavior among people with autism can be unusual, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's deviant. If we think about what's going on neurologically, we have to figure out where's that behavior coming from and what's driving it. We need to look underneath the waterline at the iceberg and then recognize that there are reasons for this behavior we're seeing, whether it is them communicating something to us, sensory maintenance, comfort, things like that. There's a purpose that we're seeing specific behaviors. Something you've all experienced, I'm sure, is the resistance to change or transitions. So trying to get our students to transitions. Yesterday, I know that's what many of the teachers told me, like transitions are tough. And so that's something that structure will help support. Our students can have a real rigid thinking in the rules. I joke that they can be the narc of the classroom. Like they will tell you if somebody is not following the rules, especially in the gen ed setting, right? So we know that we're going to use that to our advantage when it comes to structure. Our students can have a real need for routines, but we all need routine, right? I mean, you all probably had your morning routine before you came here today. Even though you're coming to a different place, you probably had something that you did that you typically do before your work days. And so that's something that we will create for our students as well. And then the last, and one of the bigger pieces when we're talking behavior, is incorporating our students' narrow interests. Now, there's some weird ones out there, but they're not weird to them, right? I mean, I know more about vacuums and air conditioners than I ever thought I would learn in my entire life because I had students and that was their interest. So we put it into everything. So if they're counting vacuums. If they're spelling vacuum brands. You know, we're trying to use anything we can to get that engagement and that buy-in from our students, which also helps reduce boredom behaviors that we see when the students have the same activities that they're working on over and over again, like a file folder, that might not be as interesting. Other things just to be mindful of is thinking about when we're still underneath that water line. Gross motor, I have seen students that, they can slither under the table and they're out the door faster than you can say stop. And then there's other students that are walk more agile or with a gait, and then anywhere in between, of course. Talking about fine motor, some of our students, we know they hate handwriting, right? When it comes to having to write their name or anything, that can be a real struggle for them. But other students I've seen that are beautiful artists and get really into fine details. So again, anywhere on the spectrum, our students can fall. And then I think we've really moved away from this piece, at least in the education world, but I don't know about other areas, that no longer is it assumed that because someone has an autism diagnosis that they're naturally gifted in something like math. I think that was a real connotation that we saw, but I'm sure many of you have also experienced students that are severely cognitively impaired and have an autism diagnosis. So definitely can be anywhere in between. Learning style and play can certainly be affected by autism. So if we're thinking about talking about our students in a respectful way, instead of saying they're low functioning and high functioning, we say that they're concrete learners and abstract thinkers. That just tells us how do we shift the activities we're making for them. So if they are concrete learners, they're working on matching, sorting, activity completion, just moving something from the left and putting it to the right. That's where someone at concrete learners thinking versus abstract thinkers are probably doing maybe more grade level or below grade level work, but they just need some additional support. We know our students can be really detail focused on things versus seeing the big picture, and we'll see a video example of that later. I was even in a classroom last year to consult for a student, and there was a misprint in the text, and that made this student bananas. She could not move on. She wanted everybody in the classroom to know that this was a problem. She needed her teachers to call, I think it was like McGraw-Hill, to fix this. It was a problem for her. She couldn't see the overall lesson in the period. She could only focus on that one detail. And some of our students are like that. We know our students can definitely have difficulty with organizing, sequencing, and generalizing skills. So structure really speaks to that because we want our students to not just be doing something one-on-one with somebody, we want them to carry it with them everywhere. So working on communication or working on fine motor, not just doing it with you at a one-to-one space, but also in all areas of the classroom, in the school, and at home. We know, of course, that learning styles can be affected by anxiety and distractibility. And then when we look at play, given those difficulties with joint attention, imitation is going to be difficult for our students sometimes. So modeling doesn't always speak to our students necessarily. And then we also know that lack of imaginary play can also be present as well. All right. So we are going to blow through a quick introduction of structured teaching, then we'll take a break. Are you still with me? Okay, cool. So structured teaching has two main goals, and it supports a student throughout a lifetime. So like I said, when I introduced structured teaching, it's something that works for our early education students all the way up through adulthood. It helps our students increase understanding and skills, and it provides supports. And those can last a lifetime, and they're going to look different over time. All right. So this first video is of our executive director. It's her Yaya, who came from Greece. Does anyone speak Greek here? Sometimes people do. They raise their hands. So here is a little clip, and let's see if we can understand what it is that she's saying. So I'll check in with you, but because I'm going back and forth, I'm not going to pause the video. So first, let's see if we can understand what she's saying without any supports, and then once we have supports, what does that look like? And can we understand what she's saying?
Θέλω να σηκώσεις το χέρι σου και με τα δάχτυλα να κουνήσεις τα δάχτυλα σου. Θέλω να σηκώσεις το χέρι σου και με τα δάχτυλα να κουνήσεις τα δάχτυλα σου.
Okay, so I'm making the assumption that we are all readers here. And that would be the visual support that would speak to us best when we are learning a language. So what was she saying from the visuals that we got? What can we assume? Lift your hand and wave, right? So those supports spoke to us, and that's what we have to be mindful of for our students, is making sure that the language we're giving is at the right comprehension level for them to understand. There was a classroom I was in yesterday. Every single student had the exact same schedule, and it was picture symbols with words, and there were kids that did not understand picture symbols. So we really have to make sure that this is the supports we're putting in place. Just because it's a support doesn't mean it's going to work for them. We have to use the support at the comprehension level where our student is. All right, there's that iceberg again. So cue in here. Structured teaching is an educational technique that was developed by Division Teach, which they changed their name a couple years ago to Teach Autism Program. This is their website if you're looking for more information. They do trainings out of the University of North Carolina, and that's where many of our trainers and directors and board was trained from Have Dreams. And so all of the trainings that we offer here are based off of the ones that are done in North Carolina. So I'm now going to show you a video of what it looks like before structure is in place. This is our teen group in Park Ridge. This video is a few years old. These are actually now all participants in our life skill programs. They're adults now. But we're going to watch what it looks like before there's any structure in place for this group. You will also see a person in a purple hoodie, and that is a peer volunteer, so she's neurotypically developing.
All right, we got to get set up, so why don't you guys sit here and just talk for a few minutes, all right?
Yes.
Right.
Do you know what kind, Bianca, do you know what kind of bus that Tran is?
It's boots.
Is it yellow or white? No, white.
White? I'm sorry.
Semis on that road.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you see it?
Yeah.
Michael, what did you do in school?
On school?
Yeah, what did you do?
Did you want for a pistol in
Did you go to gym?
Yeah.
What are you doing in gym? Are you going swimming yet? Did you go swimming?
Yeah, I went swimming.
Mm-hmm. Is it fun?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Best. School? Yes. You know, Michael? What? What's your son, Mark? Yeah.
Memory card. Jenny, this is the memory card. This is probably about a $500 phone. Around $450. Service stunk. It kept breaking on him, like just dying out, and the battery was charged. So he had it at work, and he was gonna throw it out. I said, no, I'll take it. So he brought it home for me about last year now. So it's pretty cool. But I just don't know how to get to the ringtones. I mean, we get to them, but you can't play them.
All right, cool. You guys ready for class?
Yeah.
All right, come on over.
Okay, for some of us, we might be like, that was great. I would have loved if my students would do that. But what was really happening? So we have, Bianca was talking with Michael and asking about his day. And, you know, what did he have? And he was kind of giving like yes and no answers. Not atypical for a teenager, I recognize. However, he wasn't really expanding on it. He's like, yeah, I had basketball. I had swimming, you know, and he wasn't really saying much more or asking anybody else what they did. And then we have Logan, who has this new phone. And he's going on and on about his phone and all the features that he has. And he is not picking up on any of those cues that nobody's listening, right? We've got Liam that's like looking in the air. Jenny is like her body's completely turned away from him. Nobody's asking any follow-up questions, right? So, in this next video, we have the same participants in the same room on the same day. And here's where we added structure. So the first part of the video, I'm just going to pause real quickly because that is kind of our bread and butter of structure.
Who are we going to interview?
So I'm going to pause right here. So you can see on this board, expectations are set. Without somebody having to say, you're going to sit here and you're going to listen to these questions and you're going to answer and things like that. This already tells them exactly what they're going to be doing. They're interviewing Michael. Michael's sitting right there. And they're going to be asking 16 questions. So they've got 16 white boxes here that are going to get filled. And when that board is full, the activity's done. So we've answered a lot of questions for our students that sometimes have a hard time sitting in a group. How long do I have to be here? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing? That's already answered. And then you'll see as we watch the video, a basket is going to get passed around that has the questions that they're going to write the answer and fill the board. So now we'll watch the rest.
Who are we going to interview?
Michael.
Michael, do you guys want to find out all about him?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right, Jess, start us off. Why don't you ask him a question?
What's your favorite holiday?
Thanksgiving?
Ooh, Thanksgiving. What I am.
What's his favorite holiday, Jenny?
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. Excellent.
Thanksgiving.
All right, listen to Logan.
Who, me?
Yeah.
We have
What
4
does this
people.
mean? Old.
Massage.
How old? Okay. Hold that.
Please give me a back right here.
How old are you?
17?
Very nice. Michael is, how old, Lee?
17.
17.
Full door.
Pick one.
What kind of food do you like?
Kind of food? Macaroni.
Cheese.
Macaroni and cheese. Who else likes that?
Me too.
Yeah, that's
I
good
do
stuff.
not like it.
You don't?
No.
No.
You have
Favorite-
any handwriting.
What's your favorite drink, Michael?
My favorite drink is Diet 7-Up.
I want you to be.
Ugh.
You don't like
That's not my favorite.
You don't like that?
Oh my god, I'll probably throw up if I drink
Diet.
that.
7
S P
E
S
E B.
S E S.
Conversation, it's a little more natural, right? Michael's giving answers and they're giving responses. Like they were a little stiff at first, warming up, but then by the time Michael starts talking about his favorite drink, everybody's like, ugh, I would throw up. You know, and so now it becomes much more natural of a conversation, and there's a reason for that. We have taken away some of that anxiety of our students not knowing what it is they're supposed to be doing in that space. These visuals have supported everything so that the students feel comfortable, they can kind of let their guards down a little bit, and they're able to socialize better and communicate more effectively. And that's what made that group better. I will show, too, people always ask later today on our website, that is an activity that you can download and create that we offer, that interview board. So, but I'll show you later today. So, why do we use structure? So from that specific video example, you can see that it was used for receptive communication. So nobody was saying like, it's your turn now, it's your turn. They knew whose turn it was because the basket was passed to them. They knew how long they had to sit there because it was all there. And essentially, the adults that were facilitating were just there facilitating. They weren't the ones asking the questions. They weren't giving any prompts. We were really just helping the game flow so that the students understood the supports that were in place. It's used as a learning support. So just because it's there doesn't mean our students aren't going to be able to learn it. It's not something they're going to have to use all the time. Again, we want it to be skills that they can generalize to other spaces. So ideally, it's something that becomes more independent for them. So once they've learned some of these questions, it'll kind of be like in their back pocket. So when they meet somebody new, they might have that back there to offer up, like, what's your favorite drink? What's your favorite food? As they get to know somebody. We reduced that overload of information by spelling it out clearly what those expectations were. And structure helps reduce those problematic behaviors, which are often a result of confusion and anxiety for our students. There are 4 guiding principles to structure teaching. The first one being that our individual students learn best visually. So you've already heard me say it multiple times. Sometimes, does anybody watch Bravo after the show? Bravo Clubhouse? Yeah, where there's that buzzword. I feel like visuals are my buzzword. So they learn best visually. So communication, we're going to make visual. So something that is auditory, we're going to take it and we're going to put it down so the students have a better understanding of what is expected of them when you're having a conversation or when you're sharing information. Academics, of course, we're going to make more visual. I think that's something that already in the classrooms that we're doing, but we're going to talk about individualizing it a little bit more so that it's more enticing for our students to do. And then even real-world activities like creating a recipe is going to be visual. Number 2, guiding principle is strengths and interests. which you've already heard me mention, but we really want to incorporate our students' strengths and interests. So that is something that we talk about this afternoon is informal assessment. How do you find out what their interests are? That preference assessment, what does that look like? So in this particular example, I found out that a student loved Legos in our summer training. So what did I do? I took a skill that I wanted him to have and I incorporated his interest. So I wanted him to be able to count. So he's counting, he's building Legos stacks, and he's counting using this activity. All of those numbers are Velcroed on, so it's different every single time he sees this activity. It's not always going to be 4 is red, 3 is green, and 9 is orange. It's going to be different each time, so they really have a better understanding if our student understands these skills. And then we want to think about the 80-20 rule as our third guiding principle. So 80% of what they're doing we want to be familiar to our students because they have such a resistance to change and transitions. We want to keep things familiar, so we keep it calm for them. And then that 20% is new. So for this particular example for this student, we first worked on counting blocks, and then we moved on to greater than, less than. Still using Legos, still using visual supports, but we're going to keep adding on to those skills that we want the students to have. Lastly, being that behaviors require teaching. We can't just assume our students know how to behave. And we can't just rely on the visuals if we're not teaching them. So this example on the right is from like somebody's Calm Corner for a student working on a breathing board. If our students don't know how to use that board, like we haven't taught them when they are calm and available for learning, we can't expect them to use it when we send them to a Calm Corner, just use your breathing board. We have to teach it. And that's with everything that we're doing, is that we have to teach them what the expectations are. Okay, we are right on time at 10:45. We will take, is it 10, 15 minutes? 15. A 15-minute break, and then we will dive into the pyramid in great detail after. Okay? I'll be here for questions if anybody wants to ask. I'll turn off the mic. All right, so we will kick back in here, looking at the structured teaching pyramid. And so this is what we use when we're going back to our classroom settings of where to start. So when you're thinking about, I don't know where to start, because I'm going to give you a lot of information today. So when you go back, just as you're building a pyramid, we're going to tell you to start at the base of the pyramid in the environment. And the environment is that arrangement of physical space and furniture and minimizing distractions. And I'm going to show you a few different examples of how that looks. It's going to look different depending on your age group that you're teaching and what materials you have, essentially, what kind of shelving and things like that. Then from environment, we're going to work on schedules. So as I mentioned earlier this morning, we're going to talk about individualizing schedules so that it works for your students, so it speaks to them, so they understand. Because our ultimate goal is for our students to be as independent as they possibly can be. So it's, again, on an individual basis, but that's going to be an important part of it. So your schedules are going to get your students from A to B. Then we work on to-do lists. A to-do list tells your student what to do once they're there. So to-do lists are something, they used to be called work systems, if you're familiar with that, but we changed the language to to-do list a little while ago. And that essentially, if you have a student that gets to an area but they don't get started right away, it could be that they need a to-do list put in place. So we'll show examples of what that can look like. And then last, at the top, we'll get to activities and how to visually structure activities so it has a clear beginning and end, so that it's flexible, so it's not the same every time, and how we incorporate students' interests as well. When we're creating activities, these are the guidelines that we typically follow, and that's that the materials should be organized left to right, top to bottom. It builds consistency in your classroom, and it's also how we read, so that's why it's set that way. We're going to individualize it based on comprehension and interest. So we're going to think about their comprehension level, if it's object, picture, or written, and then what are their interests. We're going to provide clear endpoints. So it's not going to be an activity that they're going to complete, and then we're going to undo it and have them do it again. That builds frustration for the student, and it takes away the finished part of an activity, so that motivation for a student to do it. We're going to highlight relevant information, reducing any distractions, and then we want to build flexibility through routines. So File folders. I know those are very common to have in the classroom because they are visual, they are already created for you, they're easy to store. If you have file folder activities, I'm not saying throw them away, but what I would say is cut up where the answers are, because the answers should not be in the same place every single time. And there's a reason for that. Because you actually don't know if your student has memorized the file folder activity and they've built that motor plan of where the answer is every time, or if they actually have the skill that the file folder is teaching. As many of you maybe have experienced, our students on the autism spectrum have very strong memory skills. And so they can memorize things having done it once or twice. They know how to complete that file folder. So if you move around where the answers are, Velcro them on so that they switch each time, they actually have to scan the answers to find the information and identify it. And that's where you're working on that skill versus them memorizing the file folder activity itself. When we're talking about structured teaching essentials, a big piece of it is practicing errorless learning. So our students tend to learn the mistakes and not from them. So if they do something one way that one time, they're probably going to continue to do it that way. And here's a video example of what that looks like. We don't need sound for it. I will talk through it. This is Justin, who is at our summer. We do a classroom setup training over the summer, where you spend one day creating a classroom for a student, and then the students come in on days 2, 3, and 4, and you work hands-on with them to see really how this structure works. So this is Justin, the first time that he's going into a leisure area. Leisure, or break time, is something that can be very stressful for our students because they don't always know what they're supposed to do in there. So even though you may have a bin of Legos or Magna-Tiles or coloring things, they might not know what it is that they're supposed to do with it, even though you say it's break time. Break can be really stressful for our students because they don't always know how to fill that time. So here is an example of Justin at break time. So we'll watch him first to see what he does the first time he goes in there, and then the second time he goes in there, he has some structured activities. But be mindful in thinking about how quickly our students learn things. That's not it. So that basketball is his transition symbol to his schedule, because basketball is a high interest for him. He has a first, next digital picture schedule that he's supposed to match in this space. But because we didn't stay on top of him to guide him where the match was, he's kind of wandering, but he found it. So now he's in this open space with toys, but he doesn't know what to do, right? He takes a plate and puts it to his mouth, and then he's going to stand on one leg. Seems innocent enough, but when our students learn these routines, sometimes they can get in more trouble that way because then they start to make their own fun, and it isn't necessarily what we intended them to do in there. So here's what Justin's going to do the next time he comes to this leisure space. So you see he picked up on that routine. He's like, oh, this is what I do in here, is I put a plate to my mouth, and I'm going to stand on one leg. That's how fast the routines can be built. So if we can make those routines errorless in what we want them to do right away, they're more likely to do that. So here is some structured activities that he learned for leisure. So we teach leisure skills 2 at the one-to-one space. So this is one of those see and says. So he pulls it down, he hears the sound, and then he's just going to put a token in. So that tells him how many times he's going to be pulling that down. So if you have students that like cause and effect toys, we also want to provide a clear beginning and end to it so that it's just not endless. And then, again, we're helping with that transition off of something preferred because now we've structured it more for them visually. So he's finished that activity, because all the tokens are in the bin. And then now he's going to slide it over. So they just use duct tape on the floor to provide a visual for what he's supposed to do with it. You can have a table in your leisure space. You don't have to put them on the floor. And then here, so if you have students that line up cars, now we can give them something a little more constructive of what to do with the cars. We've provided a track that has dirt, water, and then a ramp that slides into a garage. And then it goes in the garage and it disappears. Again, we've got a clear beginning and end so that they know how to interact with it, but also how long they have with it. So they have their 4 cars. And then he puts it in finished. So he sees that that bin is now empty. He's going to slide it over. And then he gets his basketball to go back to his schedule. So that's how you build those positive routines. And then he's transitioning on to the next thing. So that's why that arrowless learning is so important, because if we guide them from behind, we can tap their shoulders and point to where it is that they're supposed to be so that they really build in that routine in those spaces. Instead of picking up a plate and trying to make their own fun in there, we've now provided clear expectations of what they do in those areas. We want to make sure that we're fading our prompts, because when the same prompts are given over and over and over again, our students become very dependent on them. Verbal prompts are the hardest for our students to fade. So if you have any students that will work and then they just sit there when they're done, it could be that they're waiting for you to say good job, because that is a routine that you have built with them that they have. So they're relying on that verbal prompt as part of like being finished to move on to the next thing. So that's why we have to be really careful as the type of prompts that we're giving to make sure that it's something that can be sustainable for our students to be more independent. So I'm not saying that we can't cheer on our students and tell them that they did a great job, but I would say after they finish their work, they can come and check in with you, and you can do the high five or things like that. Instead of building yourself verbally into the routine of saying good job as you're sitting with them, wait until they're completely done and you're in a different space so that they know that this is where I'm supposed to be independent and not relying on those verbal prompts. And then we get to competence motivation. So this is that intrinsic reward system. So if we are incorporating things that the students are interested in already into the activities they're doing. So it's not something they have to earn. It's already incorporated into the activity. You're going to get a little bit more buy-in from a student, more motivation. And then also, we're teaching our students how to be successful, because they're completing the things that we want them to do, but they're also enjoying it at the same time, building that competence motivation. I was in a classroom the other day where the student was, what are you working for? So he picked something that he was working for. Well, he didn't get it. So because he wasn't doing the work. So we have to help our students to be successful to get those things, to understand that consequence piece of it, right? Consequences aren't just bad, they're also good. Like if you finish this, you get to do this. And when we put parameters around that you have to earn this by doing this work, and then we don't help them to be successful to actually earn it, we've lost the point. Right? That behavior is going to continue. They're going to keep refusing to do work because they're like, oh, well, I won't get it anyway, because we haven't taught them how to be successful within the activities we're giving them. So we really want to give that competence motivation in the activities we're doing, and here's a video example of what that looks like. So you can see prompt level, she's hand over hand showing him, don't grab all the Legos at once. But she's not telling him no. She's just hand over hand showing him and then showing him where it goes. So same thing here. She's hand over hand showing him, don't grab them all to shove them in, just do one at a time. So she's physically prompting him like that. And she's hand over hand showing him this is the way that we then move it to the right so you know you're done. Look at his face. He's like, I did that. That was awesome, right? That's success that we want to build in our students. We want them to feel confident in what they're doing. We want them to, meet the expectations that we're giving them, so then they're more likely to do more work for you. I think when we're constantly putting these parameters around that you have to earn these things, why aren't we incorporating it into what they're doing? To make it more fun, to get that buy-in. And then they feel successful with what they're doing. So really that's a big piece of the puzzle when it comes to structure. Yes?
Are those videos available to us to share with teams?
Yeah. So no, the question was, are those videos available to share with the team? Due to privacy reasons, we don't share our videos. But you can model it. You can do your own video, an example, and show. You'll also notice during this video that she wasn't talking to him while teaching him. She was really just following this prompt hierarchy, which was physical, hand over hand being the most, and then the least being independent. So after physical, maybe after he saw it the first time, the second time he saw it, maybe she would be gesturing or pointing of where to put the coins in until she could fade herself out, so he knew where to put the coins in. So she's not talking because that verbal prompt is the hardest to fade. So she keeps talking and says, like, good job, you did great, put a coin in. Like, he's now building that routine of you verbalizing everything, taking away that independence piece. So I'm not saying we don't talk to our students. We're just not going to talk to our students when we want them to be independent at something. When it comes to communication and social skills, absolutely, we are going to be talking to them. And we are going to be modeling how to use devices and how to use their textbooks and how to use their language. We are going to model that. But if we want them to be independent, we don't want to insert ourselves in that. When it comes to autism, we're going to teach the entire autism curriculum. You can see no piece of the pie is bigger than another. We need to work on all of these skills in the classroom every day. So our students need to work on those social skills because that's a core deficit for our students with autism. We need to work on academics. We need to work on communication. It can't just be solely on the speech path. It has to be stuff that we're doing every day for our students to practice and generalize those skills. And then community, motor skills, and life and coping skills are also extremely important. So this is a classroom scenario. I was in this classroom, this was a year ago now, so it was end of September was when I was in there. I consult with specific districts, and this is a district I've been working with for a few years. This particular group of students, the year prior, the teacher was in and out on medical leave. And so as we know, the sub shortages, there really wasn't a consistent sub in the room each day. And staff was doing the best that they could, but the kids were really struggling. They didn't have that consistency. They didn't have that structure because that's what the teacher brought to the space. And so the kids had a really difficult year. And the staff, unfortunately, was blaming the students. That he wouldn't do this. He won't comply with this. He doesn't want to. He knows what he's doing. He's just not doing it. So then I come in the fall, the year later, where they have a new teacher. She's a first-year teacher. She came to our classroom setup training, so she did the structure and put in place. Same group of kids. There's 7 students and 3 staff in this particular video. There's the first-year teacher. There's 1 staff that's on break and 1 staff that's out of the room. So there's no staff currently in the room because 1 teacher is helping a student in the hallway transition. And here's what the rest of the students are doing. So here's where those positive routines can come into play. I am the adult in the room taking film, but I am not interacting with them at all. And you can see all the students are on task. They're in their areas doing what they're supposed to be doing because that's what they were taught to do. And this is only 1 month in to the school year. So obviously it was not the students, as some staff sadly was blaming, but it's just the routines that were built. Those positive routines were put into place, and the students understood, when I go here, this is what I'm doing. When I transition out and I go here, this is what I'm doing. They all knew what they were supposed to be doing at that time. So I get questions a lot like, I don't have enough staff to do it. Well, if you build in these routines, you don't need staff. You still need a few to facilitate, but you don't need a one-to-one. So now we get into the environment where we create visually distinct areas, which we just saw in that video. You saw dividers, visually defining the space for each student and what the expectations are. We're going to create those meaningful boundaries to separate the areas and minimize distractions wherever we can. So, for example, in preschool classroom, some areas that you might have in the green is what we recommend you always have. And then yellow are ones that you'll see consistently throughout. And then the pink is kind of like more age specific. So we always recommend that you have a one-to-one area and an independent space. So one-to-one's where you're doing your teaching, and independent's where they're practicing what you're teaching. So we're working on generalizing those skills. Then you'll have like a circle time, games area. So a game to sit and practice those social skills and social communication activities and things like that. They need to practice them, and they need a space for that. Snack and group, and then you can individualize it more what your students' interests are, having something like pretend play, maybe a motor sensory area or an art area. And they don't have to take up a lot of space. It can just be like a desk and a shelf. It doesn't have to be this huge space that you have. When we move into elementary and middle school classrooms, you'll see that one-to-one and independent is still there because we're still working on new skills at that one-to-one space and having them practice it at independent areas. But then maybe you might have like an independent leisure area, like we saw Justin playing with the cars and the See and Say. Maybe you have a books and reading area that has adapted books for your students to be able to sit and read. And then you'll see games is on there still because we want to practice that social leisure, some group work probably. Maybe you have a snack or kitchen prep area. And then we can introduce also the concept of waiting. This is something that our students need to know how to do. We all have to learn how to wait. So you can even have a designated waiting space because nothing runs on time anyways, right? We're always running from one place to another. Something happens and we're never running on time. So, we're not running on time today. Go sit and wait for 2 minutes, and maybe there's a fidget bin underneath the seat for them to play with to learn how to wait. This is a skill that they need to have. And then in high school, areas you would still have is one-to-one and independent. So we're still teaching new skills. And then an independent space for them to practice. And then maybe you have a group vocational area, places where they can practice, how to ask for materials they need, and practice those voc skills. Social leisure, still something they have to work on. Kitchen prep, maybe something like that. And then thinking about independent leisure spaces, music, hangout, we changed the language so it's more age appropriate, but they still have to know how to take a break. And that's something in our Evanston site, we actually we did a partnership with Walgreens Corporate, and we have a mock-up Walgreens in our building. And the students, our participants, have a chance to practice stacking the shelves, scanning things, checking for expiration dates, all things that they would need to know how to do to work at a Walgreens. We also have a break room in there. And so our students need to know how to start a break, what to do on it, how to come off of a break on time. These are all still skills that they have to learn. So same thing in the classroom that we can be working on too. So as I mentioned before, your one-to-one teaching area, this is where new skills are introduced. So this is that safe space. So your students have a rapport with you where they can come here and they know that things are going to be new, but you're going to help them be successful in earning whatever it is that they're earning or doing whatever it is they're doing that's of interest to teach those new skills. So when we're teaching new skills, one thing we want to do is an informal assessment. So we're going to put raw materials in front of a student and see what they do with it. So that example you saw earlier was like we put Legos in front of the student, and I found out that he really liked them, and he was color matching them. So I thought, I can use that skill to make a counting task. So we don't always know what they're going to do during a formal assessment. Sometimes they might not be interested in the Legos, and that just tells us we're not going to use Legos when we create an activity for them. We're going to find something else. So you're going to create activities from that informal assessment to teach at the one-to-one space. And then we want to move it out. So then for mastery, we want to make sure that they put it in other areas so they have chances to practice those skills. Independent areas can look like anything. You do not have to have an independent space for every single student. You can have shared independence for students. And here's an example on the left side. This is kind of what's called like a cockpit formation, where the student pulls their work from the left, completes it at the desk, and then they put it back on the left or they put it on the shelf on the right, depending on what their to-do list is. On the right side, this is actually an image from one of my classrooms where I used the cabinet that was already built in that I couldn't move as a space, and so the student would walk to the shelf to grab their materials, complete their materials at their desk, and bring it back. Here's a group space, and again, that can look like anything. And I know every year it's going to be different to what your students need. Some students can have that more typical setting where they just have desks in rows, whereas other students you might have at tables. Some students you might have in cube chairs. We just want to be mindful that we're giving them a personal boundary space, something that we talked about earlier with those unwritten social rules. We want to make sure they know where they are supposed to be. Whether it's duct tape on the floor or spots that they stand on, we just want to give them that visual so they know. Additionally, if you are using the same space for multiple things, so maybe you have a group area that also becomes an OT group, and then it also becomes a snack space, we recommend that you have a visual to change the look of the space. So if it's group time, it might look open, and then snack time, maybe a placemat comes down. And then if it's OT time, maybe the picture of the OT is there. So they just know what to expect when they get to those areas. You don't have to have multiple areas zoned out if you have multiple activities happening. Transition space, just to be mindful like where the schedule is going to be. I actually would not recommend one transition space for everybody where all the schedules are in the same space because that creates a lot of chaos. And it's hard to keep it errorless for your student transitioning as well. So you can spread it out among the room, and we'll get into schedules next. Independent leisure areas. So you can have pretend play. You can have just a desk and shelf for the student to complete activities. And then even on the right here, you might have your sensory space, but you can see it's clearly divided so that it's visually clear what area they're supposed to be in. Games and social leisure, places to practice those social skills and social communication. And then we're going to see a couple different video examples that we don't need sound for. I'll just kind of talk through. And here first is a preschool classroom. So this particular teacher, this is August, so the students aren't here yet, so some of it might look a little cluttered. And we'll just kind of walk through the space and just pay attention to how the dividers keep the spaces defined for the students so they know what the expectations are. This is just their transition space when they walk in. They put their stuff in their cubbies. We'll move through there. So you can see here is a reading space. So there's adapted books, there's word walls, there's magnetic letters, but everything to do with reading is in this area. And then she comes out of the space, and then next to it, this is an independent work area. So where the students practicing those skills that they learned at the one-to-one table. So 2 students can be there sitting back to back, practicing new skills. And then back here, like I said, it's cluttered. She covers up all the shelves and stuff like that, but this is her teaching space, the one-to-one area where we saw earlier with the student with confidence and motivation. She was working with him here, so he pulls off the left, completes it, and then puts it to the shelf on the right. And you can see he's facing a wall so that they won't be as distracted. Here's a circle time space where they do like morning meeting, things like that. And then in the middle is another group table where they have different types of related services groups or small group activities. And then on the other side of the room, when she gets there, is essentially the play side. So we've got our work side with its like reading and books, and then we have independent and one-on-one teaching. In the middle, we have group, and then over here is play. So there's a clear division so they know what to expect. Another thing I want to point out is the way that she set up the furniture. Now this is for younger students. She set it up so that they have to get into the space. So instead of just being open areas that the students can just pop in and out of, this requires them to go in, which helps provide more boundaries for them and keeps them into the space longer. So then here's a sensory area. You can see with beans and trampoline. And then behind her is art as well. Then here is another classroom. This is an elementary classroom in a private day school. And she's going to talk through the space a little bit. Take this off. Yep. It's helpful.
Morning group, science group, calendar, all of our different group central focused ideas, and we always have a schedule for a group. Over here you'll see one of our independents, so I have 4 independents set up in my classroom. A big thing to take note of is that I have a student in a wheelchair, so I've had to adapt independence to make it work for different physical needs, but it's nice because it still works for all the kids despite their different needs. So here, back in this corner, is another independent station for one of our kiddos who gets more distracted. And then we also have 2 independents over here for 2 of our girls that can check their independence more independently without as much prompting. Back in this corner is our teacher table corner where I do all of my IEP work with the kiddos. Then, over here in the middle is our game space. So this is our social leisure, and we have games for the girls to pick from. And then over here is our reading nook. It's our independent leisure nook, and we have books in here, and we have some putty and some different sketches. That's the space.
One thing I will note that I forgot to mention is that her particular classroom is actually an all-female classroom, which I had never actually encountered before in special ed. So you can see her space looks different from the early elementary. They have games area, they have like a leisure space, they have independence for students, and then the open group tables and things like that. And then lastly, this is from our classroom setup training. So when we do the classroom setup, we bring students in, but we never know who's going to be coming. So we happen to have this here, a 4-year-old student, a 13-year-old student, and a 24-year-old. So we had a wide variety that we're still setting up a classroom for. So we separated the classrooms for the 24-year-old and made it more adult transition space for him. And so we'll just walk through kind of the space so you get a general sense. So you see that the same theme still applies, that we're visually defining the areas, but it looks a little bit different. Like it's not as high of boundaries like the dividers and things like that. It's a little bit more open. And so we'll walk through here. And we don't need sound for it. I can kind of just talk through. So here is the hangout space, so where they're practicing their leisure skills. They have like crossword puzzles and things like that are there. He also has a portable schedule, so there's like these schedule pieces are everywhere, the paper, so they know to put it on that paper to keep it organized. Back here is a workout space for him, so he works on physical, challenging work and things like that. And then we'll keep moving through. Over here is a vocational space where they're practicing, some packaging skills or money, envelope stuffing. And then in the middle of the room, here you can see there's like a one-to-one space where they're working on specific new skills. So that's still there, that doesn't go away. And then in the back corner over here is independence, so where he's practicing working on those skills from the one-to-one table to make sure he's got it and understands it, so then it would transition out to other areas of the room. And then as we come around, in this space is a vocational area where he would be working next to somebody. So that also is a social skill that our students, our participants and adults need to have, is being able to work with other people. So asking for specific pieces that they're missing, how do you politely ask for certain things or practice, like if someone's in your personal space, things like that, they would have different scenarios that they would run through. All right, so in summary, when thinking about environment, you want to make sure your spaces are clearly defined. So we saw several different examples of what that can look like for that clear definition. We want to target areas that aren't working. So if you have a sensory area and it just ends up being a dumping zone where the kids just go and lay and collapse, or they're just like not really playing appropriately, there's no reason that you have to keep it. You can make it something else, and you can gear it towards your students' interest. So like I had one year in my classroom, my students were really into science experiments. That was something they thought was fun. So we made a science experiment station. So there's no rules as far as like what you can put in there for leisure. It's just thinking about those leisure skills and helping them practice them. And then just being mindful of clutter can be really distracting. I know storage is forever an issue, no matter who you're teaching. We always have to be mindful of that. So anything you can put away in bins, cover up with fabric, things like that is always good for our students because it helps them to focus more on what's important versus the clutter around them. Remember how they're so detail focused. Questions about environment before we move up the pyramid? Okay, so now we're going to move into schedules. And here's what research says for a neurotypical person what a daily routine and schedule can offer. It can help us feel more in control. It can help us prioritize and make room for what's important. It can aid in our mental health, help us cope with change that's coming, and reduce stress levels. So we all need schedules in some capacity. And I've been in classrooms where students used to have a schedule and they no longer do. And they say, well, they know what their schedule is. They know what Monday is. Our thinking is that you never take that schedule away because, one, that's a routine that they've built, and when you take it away, now you're changing the routine. Two, how do you show a student that a change is coming in that schedule? Because you don't have it there anymore to be able to show. I'm like, hey, you normally go to math, but Mrs. M's not here today, so we're going to do art instead. So we have to be able to have a visual way to show them those changes. It also helps students if they're having a really hard time getting off the bus. This is a routine that they have that now they're able to check and see, like, what are my expectations for today? What can I do? And that sometimes putting students into structure actually helps them feel more comfortable and can regulate them. So there's different ways that we can adapt and individualize schedules for our students. First one being the type, and you heard me mention this morning comprehension level. We want to make sure that the type of schedule speaks to our student comprehension level. So if we're not sure if our students can picture match, they probably shouldn't be on a picture schedule. We want to make sure that it reaches them. So there's different types. So they can have an object schedule, whether it's an object that they use in that space once they get in there, or it's just an object that represents the space. Picture schedule. If it is a picture schedule, you can have drawings. You can have digital pictures of the space. You can use Boardmaker picture symbols. And you can use a combination and having words on that as well. But you need to make sure that your students actually understand pictures before you use that as a schedule. And then you can also have written schedules. So that can just look like in a notebook where they mark off as they go, or it can be words that they match around the room. It can look a variety of different ways. So we want to think about the comprehension level first, object, picture, or written. Then we want to think about the length. Not every student can handle a full day. In fact, you might have experienced that for some students when they see something happening in the afternoon, that's all they're focused on because they either want it or they don't want it, and it ruins their morning, right? So we want to make sure that we're mindful of how long the schedule is that we're presenting to them. Some students might only be able to handle one piece at a time, and that's okay. That's just how they're processing that information. And that may be for their entire lives. It doesn't mean that they graduate automatically to a written full-day schedule. They might always, like we have participants in our life skills program that are still on picture schedules, and they probably always will be. The layout for how it's presented to the student, whether it's left to right, top to bottom, and then transition. How do they use the schedule to transition? So you will see some examples of how they use it, whether they're carrying it around to match to different spaces, or maybe they're marking off, like they've come back from a space and they mark off and they move on to the next one. There's different levels of how we can individualize that. We want to think about the location of where it actually is. So is it a transition space? Is it on their desk? Is it portable, like they carry it around with them? And then lastly is the check-in. So what cues them to go to their schedule? We saw Justin with the basketball because that was high interest. So they gave him a basketball to cue him. For other students, you might just have a card that maybe has their favorite character, something like that. Some students, you could maybe hand them a pencil and they know to cross it off and move it to the next thing. So everybody's going to be different with how you can individualize those schedules and their needs. So this is a schedule for a student that is visually impaired. And so what they did was they changed the pictures. Instead of the white background, it was a black background. They put it with an object so that the student could also feel what it was and where they were going. And then they glued it down onto cardboard. So it was an object schedule with a picture. They got one piece at a time, and it was actually presented by the teacher. So the teacher would hand it to the student who was also physically impaired. And so he would have his object schedule, so he would feel it, so he knew at least to anticipate of where it was that he was going to be going. So we just provided still some support to know what the expectations are and what they're doing. So then he would carry it around the room to different spaces and match them into a basket. This example was for a student that hated using a schedule. He did not want a picture schedule. He did not want certain schedules. And so the teacher found in her assessment that he really liked Avengers, and she found these like squishy Avengers for him to use. So you can see here it's still an object schedule. And he has 5 at a time that are in these different cups that are numbered 1 through 5. It's laid out top to bottom. And he's going to carry these objects around and match them. And then you can see on the right here, they matched to different basketball hoops around the room that have the matching picture. It's a stationary schedule, so it just stays on the back of this divider. And his check-in was a transition symbol that said Avengers Pictures. So that brought him to the pocket that he would pop in. He would grab the object, carry it, match it into the basketball hoop. So that was just something that motivated him, and he liked it, and he used it. So the objects don't necessarily have to represent where it is that they're going. It could just represent the space. Then we have picture schedule. So for this particular student, he loved Pringles and puzzles. So that's how they made their schedule. So his check-in here was a little puzzle piece of a Pringles can. So over the course of the day, he would build out that Pringles can. And then his schedule was these pieces to the right where he would take a puzzle piece and then he would go and match it to complete the puzzle in the spaces there. So incorporating their interest in what they're doing. And it was on a binder, but it was stationary. He didn't carry it with him. Here's an example of a written schedule where it's a mark-off. So the student will be coming to their schedule. They're transitioning spontaneously. So the check-in is spontaneous. So they knew once recess was done to go check their schedule. They slide recess over, and then they're going to work with the teacher. So it doesn't have to be a carry and match. It can be a mark-off as well. So now we're going to watch 3 different video examples. The first one being at the object comprehension level. This is Teddy, and he's working at home with his mom. So they wanted him to have a schedule at home, which I think sometimes schedules at home can be hard because now we're trying to put more structure into the routines of the day that can be harder for them to understand. So in this particular object one, mom's working with him, and I want you to pay attention to the prompt level she's giving. So she is verbal, she's going to be talking to him, it's her son, and she's, talking to him more. But pay attention to what those prompt levels look like and his level of independence. And it's muted.
Time for snack. Yeah, come on, time for snack. Oh, wait. Ready? Put in. Good job. Snack. Time to play. Ready?
mom is walking from behind, so not in front of him, so he can see where he's going. And there's green bins all over the house with the objects inside that he's matching to.
Play! Let's do our puzzle. Time for snack.
So they just started off with 2 objects at first for him to learn that successfully, and then they'll slowly build on it. So he's just going between snack and play.
Put in. Good job. Snack. Time to play. Oh, we got you.
And before mom was holding his shoulders, guiding him where to go, he now knows where he's going.
Good job. Let's play with the puzzle. Hey, Teddy. Time for snack.
And now he's gone. He knows exactly where he's going with it, right? So he's going to put it in the bin and sit down for snack. So now that he has this down, after a few
Good job.
transitions, they're going to add more.
Hey, Teddy. Let's play. Uh-oh. Good job. Let's play puzzle. Let's play upstairs.
So now we've added a new piece. And he's going to have a green bin upstairs. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because he takes a little bit going up the stairs. Well, maybe I won't. It takes too long to buffer. But anyway, so he goes up the stairs and there's the green bins that are there as well for him to use. And he's going to transition between 2 spaces upstairs. And then when mom hands him the play piece and says time to play, he immediately knows to take that piece and go down the stairs to go back to the play area. So the reason that this worked so well was because mom taught it to him errorlessly. She made sure he got exactly where he needed to go to build that independence level. And we also, comprehension-wise, we met where he was. If he didn't understand pictures yet, the objects were where he needed to be. And so now those green bins were a visual cue to have everywhere for him to be able to be successful and independent. So next we're going to look at Emily, and this is also at home. She has a picture word schedule. And you'll see they start with just 1 piece at a time, getting her to transition. And she does not like it. Look familiar to anybody? So she's matching pictures to pockets around the house. So she's going to transition off of music. She has a cue card, so she knows where it goes. It goes into the pocket. This is Emily. So transitioning off snacks, she doesn't really want to do. Yeah, really unhappy, which probably many of our students probably are the first time we introduce it. They don't want someone telling them what to do. But it eventually becomes a tool that you can use. And this is where consistency is important. I'd fast forward it, but I don't want it to stop buffering.
Oh, you want snowman?
So really not happy about this transitioning. But they're trying to get her to use the system. And I will say it took, we'll see shortly, it took 3 weeks of practice of her using the schedule, and so we'll see what that looks like shortly. She gets swing.
Is this her entire afternoon at home?
I'm sorry, what? Yes, parents were trained on what to do, working from behind, making sure that they stay consistent. And it's, you know, it's easy for us to want to give in because we feel like we're really like hurting them. I know it's even painful to watch, but you'll see soon that it does pay off in the end. Her sister's there. All right, so here's 3 weeks later. She is wearing the same dress, but it's 3 weeks later. You can see they added more pieces to her schedule. So instead of 1 at a time, she now has 3, 3 to 4. And so she's not fighting that transition anymore. So sometimes we look at the schedule and we're like, oh, they're never going to use it, and then we try and create a new one. Sometimes they just need that consistency and that follow through, and it helps. So you can see she transitioned to music. So, you know, with the music thing, this is a problem last time too, where she was like waiting for it. I would probably incorporate some sort of communication activity for her to be able to make a request.
Do you want slippery fish? Yes, okay.
So now she's got 4 on there at a time. And they found, like, as they added more pieces, they were actually able to add her more activities that she can do in the classroom. So it says work, so they added chores for her. So now she can empty the dishwasher as well.
Is she choosing what she's doing, or she's
No, she's going top to bottom. Mm-hmm. So then she matches.
music? What determines how long she stays? Is it a specific
Right.
station?
Right. So that's where so if we're thinking in a classroom, what you would have is structured activities for how long like they're going to be in each area. You would have maybe, especially as you're first introducing a schedule, you'd want to keep those transitions short so that they practice them, kind of like what we saw with Teddy. So you come in here, you do one thing, and then you can transition out, and then you can slowly build how long they're going to be in those spaces.
So their finish is like, I'm just interested, I'm thinking of someone specifically of if she would want to be in control of how the time, do you ever give, like, is it obviously where they're at level-wise when you start helping them be in control of how much more time they have left in that center? Or is that never part of that expectation?
Yeah, so that's kind of a separate question we'll get into a little bit when we're talking about timing and how long. She was asking how long does a student stay in certain areas. It's going to be on an individual level, and that's something too to consider in the classroom. I know a lot of classrooms run on timers, and so you want them to be in specific areas for 15 minutes. For some students, that might not be reasonable. Because so they did it more like natural transitions for her. So like it seemed like she was done coloring, so they would move on to the next thing. Yeah. But in the classroom, it's actually easier because you would have structured activities in a certain amount. Right. Yeah. All right, and then this is a written schedule. You can see this is old video that we have. The student, she loved March of the Penguins. So she has a written schedule that she's going to mark off. And she's very compliant, and she does what she's supposed to do. So here she just, she's told to check her schedule, and she will come, she'll mark off what she was doing, and then she'll move on to the next thing. For some students, when we see that they're on a written schedule, we might want to put them on a portable one that they carry around, but some of our students are not organized enough to be able to do that, and then the schedule gets lost. So for Maddie, it was on the chalkboard, so it was more organized for her to be able to do it more independently. Sometimes I get questions about apps for schedules and using apps in the iPad. And I don't really have one that I recommend necessarily. I just say, like, when, do your research, of course. Making sure that it's flexible and not a pre-written schedule, one that you can edit, take your own pictures. And then for some students, it might be difficult for them to differentiate using their schedule on the iPad versus communicating on their iPad as a device. So you might want to have two separate ones, which has been done before, just because it's hard for them to switch around. And then change. So how do we show change on a schedule? I think sometimes we think it's easy just to switch it, right? Or have our staff like, can you take that one off and put this one on? We need to make sure that our students are part of that change, because our schedule is a promise that we're making with our students. So if we change it when they come back to it, many times they're going to know that you changed it, and you will probably see some behaviors. They'll be upset about it. So we want us to have a visual to show that there's a change. And in the next slide, I'll show you some picture examples of what that looks like, because we want our students to understand that change is okay and that change happens. And so here is some ideas of what you can do. So in this particular one, it was a red X, like a laminated red X that just covers up what they were supposed to do. And then at the top is what they're going to do instead. So we're just visually showing them, and we're going to talk them through it. Say like, okay, we have a change. So-and-so is not here, or this didn't run on time, or whatever it is. And so instead of this, we're going to do this. And then even on the right side, instead of morning meeting, we're going to do sensory instead. So they can really see what it looks like, that change, and they're a part of it. So instead of switching it on them. Has this ever happened to anybody? This is Hoovie's schedule, and it says break, lunch, snack, home. I can tell you that the staff did not set her schedule this way. So this tells us a couple things about Hoovie. One, we have to change her schedule because she has now figured out a bad routine with this schedule, and so you need to change the visuals and what they look like. So if you change the visuals, you change the routine. So for her, we're going to change her schedule. We can still keep it picture word, but it has to look different now because she's figured out how to manipulate it, right? Another piece that this tells us is that maybe Hoovie needs more of a voice in what her schedule is, more choice time, things like that, more things that are interesting to her, which sounds like food, snack and lunch. But we want to keep that in mind. So when we changed her schedule, we incorporated her high interest, which is Star Wars, but we still kept it a picture, symbol, and word schedule, but now it looks a little bit different because we want to change that routine that she's got with the old one. So as she works through each thing, she gets a Yoda card that covers up that says, finished, I say, and then she moves on to the next one. And so she's going to keep working through her day that way. If you look at the picture on the right, they also incorporated a choice card. So this card cues her that it's choice time, and it cues her to a choice board. So she already sees it on her schedule. This is when I get to have my choices. And then you're still in control of the choices that she has as well. So on the right is her choice board. So it's all things that are of interest to her and things that she likes to do. And then it's whatever's available in that moment. So maybe she likes to take a walk, but you don't have a staff member to take her for a walk. So you just have in-classroom things that she can do, like bubbles, trucks, things like that. So we also want to make sure that we're incorporating a voice for our students to be able to have choice time as well. And then we touched on this briefly. Time. Timers versus natural transitions. So a lot of the videos that you watched are natural transitions. So the students have a certain amount of things that they're doing in each space, and once they're done, and we'll see on a to-do list next, once they're finished, then they move on. I know a lot of people do timers because it's just easier to schedule staff that way and things like that. The problem with a timer, and I'm not saying you don't have to do it or you shouldn't do it. The problem with a timer is that, one, you can have a student that will sit there and do nothing until the timer goes off, and then they move on. And then you get into that power battle of just do one thing, right? Just do something before you move on. So by having natural transitions, that kind of eliminates that piece of it. The other thing is that with the timer, if you have students that are perfectionists and they don't get to finish, you can also see some behaviors because they get really upset because now it's undone in their mind and they need to have that sense of finished for them. So we want to make sure that you're just mindful of that. If timers work for you, I'm not saying that you have to change it, but just something to be mindful of. The natural transitions, you can still pad things in those activities in their doing to take up the same amount of time. Like you can figure out how long it takes a student to complete an activity and make sure that you have enough in there for that space of time. The middle picture is an example I saw in a classroom for students that are done early. So if you are on a timer and the student's done and they need something to do in that time, this is an early finishers basket that has I Spy cards, look and find, stickers, all sorts of things like that, which I thought was a nice idea. And then on the right here is a wait strip. So if a student finishes early and they need to wait, something like this, and this is a free resource on our website that you can also download and print and make. So in thinking about schedules, structured teaching tells you to start with your most challenging student first, because if you have enough structure for them, you'll have enough structure for everybody else. So if you want to structure your day, if you want to focus on that student first and getting them up and running in a schedule, that is a way to go. On the flip side, if you have a couple students in mind where you're like, I know they'll really benefit from this and they'll get up and running right away, that might be the path of least resistance to get them going, and then you can focus on your more challenging students. You want to make sure your schedules work for your students on their worst day. So if they are pre-readers, they should not have a written schedule. If they do not know how to match pictures successfully, they should not have a picture schedule. So you want to make sure that comprehension level is met. Excuse me, sorry. If you want to make sure you give your student time to learn their schedules, so practicing, you saw with Teddy, those short transitions, that's something I know we're in September already, but that's something that I always said when you're introducing your schedules at the beginning of the year, that you really just focus on the transitions before you get to the activities. You want to make sure your student knows your schedule because that's half the battle. If they can transition smoothly, that's a big part of your day that will get easier. You want to try to incorporate their interest in their schedule wherever you can. So if you have a student that loves water, maybe they get a ball that they get to drop in the water, and that's their transition, so they're motivated. Things like that. And then schedules can morph and change over the years. They don't have to be the exact same, but some students may be at that same comprehension level their entire lives, and that's okay. We don't have to try and make it more than it is. We just want them to be successful. Questions about schedules? Are wheels turning? Are we getting ideas? Hopefully. Yes?
Students with behaviors.
Sorry, the fan just kicked on.
Sorry, students with behaviors.
Yes?
Transitioning from classrooms or transitioning from transportation out of the wheelchair or into the school, in the room, to the table, to activity, to lunch, from the bean bag, but it shouldn't be on the bean bag. they will understand through their behaviors.
Mhm.
I've tried,
Yeah. So the question was behaviors. How do you structure a schedule for a student with behaviors that struggle with transitions? Every transition is a behavior. And so that really speaks to the autism in the waterline, like what's driving that behavior. Is this just a learned behavior that they have? Is it a behavior that they have with this particular schedule? Do we need to change the schedule so that it looks different? Are there too many pieces we're presenting at once and we just want them to have it one at a time? Maybe the transition itself is just that you bring the transition piece to them so they don't have to go to an area to make that more streamlined for them to go quickly from one place to another. So you got to take a look at how to individualize it in those 6 areas that we talked about: the type, the location, the transition, the check-in, all of that, to see if maybe there's something to tweak to make it better. And then you have to be on top of them with that errorless piece of it. I know. Anybody else have other suggestions or had students that were like this and struggled? I'm sure we all have. Yes. But I think it's really trying to get that buy-in and that understanding for them to know, like, what is expected of me in this schedule. And really chunking their day to make it manageable, so you're really focusing on those transitions being successful first before you focus on what they're doing in those spaces.
thank you.
Sure. Okay, so next, moving up the pyramid, we move on to to-do lists, and then we will break for lunch. So as your schedule gets your student from one place to another, a to-do list tells them what to do once they're there. A to-do list should answer 4 questions for your students. What is there to do? How much is there to do? When am I finished? And what happens next? If you find students like you're in a group situation and then you just keep pulling out new activities and they just keep coming, and the students eventually start to have some behaviors because they don't know how many activities you're pulling out from behind you, that's where to-do lists will come into play. This helps them to know what is expected of them. When are they going to be done? How much do they have to do? This is really important for many of our students to set those expectations and the tone for every space that you're in. Yes?
Does a setup where they have activity finished, does that serve as a to-do list?
Okay,
or would you recommend a separate to-do list and then all the activities?
Yeah, so the question was, does having a setup activity, and finish set up as a to-do list? And the answer is yes. You don't have to have something separate. And we're going to see a variety of different examples of what that can be, because essentially we're going to, just like we did with schedules, meet our students at their comprehension level. So if they are at an object schedule level, they're going to be an object to-do list level, which would be the activities themselves. Yeah. So a to-do list can support individuals with autism by helping them compensate for difficulty with generalizing. So we want to reduce that dependence on us. We want them to know what to do instead of having your staff constantly having to prompt. They should know what to do when they sit down there. If you want things sequenced in a specific order, I don't know that this is a priority for you, but if it is, this is how you can tackle that. And then it also helps our student with relieving their anxiety for when they're going to be finished. And that's an important part of this piece for our students on the autism spectrum. So we all use to-do lists. So your schedule got you here today, and then maybe you previewed, the slides last night, and that was like your agenda, so you knew what you were doing today. That was your to-do list, essentially, is that you come here, you're going to sit down, you're going to listen to me talk and talk and talk, you're going to have lunch, and then we'll talk some more, and we'll make some more, and then you go home. So that's your to-do list for when you're here. And we all have to-do lists that we use, and they can look like anything. So I'm sure if I surveyed the room, we would find some people with their schedules or to-do lists, maybe they use Post-its or they use planners, whereas other people use their phones and they use calendars on their phones. So, and you're going to use whatever works for you best, right? Some people I know, they're like the digital piece, like I don't trust it, I need to write it down so I remember it. I'm that way. But I know other people are like, no, like my husband, like he has everything in his phone and he knows what he has to do and what his expectations are. And so we all have different ways that we make our to-do list, which makes sense that for our students it's the same thing. So here is an example of a to-do list for a student who hates doing exercise. So how much is there to do? 3 things. What is there to do? Treadmill, bike, ball. When am I finished? I'm finished when I flip these pieces over. And then what happens next is, for this particular example, computer, an old Apple computer. But these all Velcro on, so it's not always computer after the bike. It can be in ball. It could be something else. So it answers those 4 questions for our student to help relieve that anxiety. When we're individualizing a to-do list, we want to think about the form. So what is that comprehension level? We want to think about the concept of finished. What does that look like? How do they know when they're done to help with that natural transition? How many activities are we putting in there? So what's the length? Some students might only be able to do one thing at a time, whereas other students might be able to sit there and they're workhorses. They'll just do anything you put in front of them. And then how much movement? So for some students, they are able to move and grab materials off the shelf, whereas other students need to be seated. Otherwise, they get distracted. So here we're going to watch Rachel. She is 4 years old. This is from one of our classroom setup trainings, and she is at the object level. So her to-do list is just the activities themselves are presented on a shelf, where she's going to take one off, complete it, and she's going to put it to the right. When they did informal assessment, they had these little toy skateboards that she really liked the wheels of them. So what they did was they glued them down upside down so that her activities just roll off. So you'll get to see what that looks like. So here she's at an independent area. She's not working with a teacher. So these are all activities that she learned and mastered one-to-one with a teacher, so now she's practicing it at the independent level. Nobody's prompting her. So she's now going to roll it down the slide that was made. And now she sees that the shelf is empty, so she knows she's done. And then what happens next, that bubble wand is her object schedule, so that transitions her to the next space. She matches that, and then she'll have a new to-do list when she's in that area that she'll start on next. All right, so here's Christopher. So he is at the picture level, and here he is working in independent leisure. So again, these are activities that we've worked and taught him to do, and so now he's generalizing that independent skill, so filling that break time. So he's going to do an adapted book and a marble maze, you'll see. So he matches the picture to the shelf, and then he's going to take the work off, so there's some movement in his to-do list. This is just an adapted book that we copied all the pictures and then cut out little like puzzle pieces for him to put in. His to-do list, though, you can see like a strip of Velcro on the desk, and that's pretty common for what you would put in each area, is just having that Velcro there. So all the pictures are on there when he comes to that space. And then what happens next is his check schedule card. So he's going to work here independently. I'm going to fast forward a little. So he puts that book back. He's coming back to the list to get the next picture, which he'll match on the shelf. Which is a marble run that he does, and it disappears into the box underneath. So again, there's a clear finished for it. I'll try and fast forward a little because the marbles take him a while. He drops them and picks them up, keeps going. I need to edit this video so it's shorter. So he put that back on the shelf, and now he's coming back to get his check schedule card, his transition card, and that brings him to his schedule, and then he'll move on to the next activity. And then last, we have Maddie. And here, her high interest is Green Day music and songs. And so these are all words from songs that she's going to match to the shelf. And then at the end, you can see it says check your schedule. So there's 6 things that she has to do. She knows when she matches all of those pieces that she's finished, and she'll check your schedule and move to the next thing. So we answered those 4 questions. And she'll get to work, and then as she does each activity, then she'll keep matching those words. So to summarize to-do list, you want to, again, think about your most challenging student first. That might help and get them up and running, and enough structure for everybody else. If you have a student that transitions to those areas but doesn't get started right away, to-do list will help that. Think about how many steps you're putting in place. For some students, matching to the shelf is like 1 extra step, and maybe they don't need to do that, so you can do just the activities. Try and incorporate their interests wherever you can. I've seen a variety of different things that are really fun with movies and stuff like that where they're matching, like one student, she had The Wizard of Oz was her high interest, and so she would match like the red shoes to Dorothy and the broom to the Wicked Witch and the basket to Toto. And then to-do list can be used anywhere you want your student to be independent. So you don't necessarily have to have one at the teacher table because you're working with them anyway. But anywhere you want them to be independent. So even places like the locker, lunch, bathroom, a to-do list will help with that and help them sequence and do things in order and have a clear beginning and end. All right, lunchtime. We made it. We are going to start back up again so we can stay on time for you. Make sure you have enough time to make activities. Any questions that arose over lunchtime and discussion? Okay, so working our way up the pyramid, we are now going to focus more on activities. So visually structuring activities to teach skills. I mentioned this earlier, but this is the structure teaching process. So all the way through, when we first start, we start at the informal assessment area. As I mentioned, it's putting raw materials in front of a student to see what they do with it. There's no right or wrong answer with what they do. It just shows you what skills they have and what interests they have. And we're going to see a video example of what that looks like as well. Then we're going to develop activities from that assessment. And from developing activities, we're going to teach it at a one-to-one space so that our students learn the skill and the activity and how it works. If after they've seen it a few times, the student still doesn't seem to understand how to do the activity, or they're not quite independent at it yet, it might need to be restructured. So you might need to flip around where some of the materials are. Maybe you've added too many steps to it. So we restructure it, and then we reteach it at the one-to-one space. So anytime we change an activity, we want to reteach it. And then hopefully they will have mastered the activity at that point, and then it's moving on to generalize in other spaces. When we talk about informal assessment, there's so many different types out there. I know you have your formal assessments that you do from your required curriculums, whatever the state and the schools are requiring you to do. Informal is quite the opposite. There's no script for it. Portfolios are a form of informal assessment, as well as the ones that we're going to focus on today, which is teacher observations and checklists and inventories. Teacher observations being unstructured. So they're authentic. So your students here are your best teachers in this moment. They're going to show you what they know, and they're going to show you what they're interested in, which help gears what supports to put in place for them. And then here's an example of what we use during a classroom setup training as a type of inventory checklist that we would do, which this is just for independent leisure. So any of your staff can be doing this as well as helping to take data for you to help get activity ideas. So here they would mark what material or activity they played with, what the interest level was, thinking about the leisure level, which means is it sensory motor, cause and effect toys, functional play like puzzles or books, or abstract play. And then any ideas for adding structure. It's always helpful to have those extra notes. Same thing for when you're structuring materials for teaching academic skills. What's the skill? We're going to score it, which we'll get into a pass, an emerge, or a fail, and then any notes that you'd want to take. There's all different types of checklists, of course, depending on what your standards are that you're using or curriculum, that you can put raw materials in front of them to see what they do with them. But things to consider when we talk about informal assessment from a structured teaching perspective, there's no right or wrong answer. So, for example, like I put Uno cards in front of a student. I might think that they're going to color match, and then they number match. So then they've showed me a new skill that they have of what they can do with those Uno cards. So that might give me another idea of what to do with it. We're not teaching during informal assessment, so we're going to give one verbal prompt, one physical prompt, and that's it. If they need a lot more support, it's probably not something that's of interest to them or a skill they have just yet. So we're not going to do anything with it at that moment. We want to make sure we're making time for informal assessment. This is what keeps the classroom exciting, interesting, to avoid some of those boredom behaviors for your students, because we're making activities that they're into and they're motivated by. We want to record as much as possible, thinking about what the students' strengths and interests are, and then noting how they, a variety of different things, how do they organize themselves, what's their attention span, like can they only hang on to things, they're only there for 2 minutes and then you've lost them. Their level of independence, what they're motivated by, and any useful cues that you might have to give. Things to ask yourself during informal assessment: what's the student's interest level? Is it a task that needs to be structured for independence or for direct instruction? So you might have skills that students have that you can just make activities that have a clear beginning and end that can move to independent areas quickly, so then you can work on those other skills that are emerging for direct instruction. Think about the student's comprehension level, object, picture, written, and does the task need to be adapted at that time? When we score it, we're scoring it as a pass, an emerge, or a fail. A pass being that the student has the skill and they're ready to generalize it. So we would structure activities for independence. Emerging skill, the student has a partial skill or it's high interest. So this is where we develop activities for teaching. And then if it's a fail, I know a fail is a word that we don't like to use very often, but it doesn't mean it in a negative way. It's more just the student doesn't have the skill or no interest in it. So we're just going to put it aside. We've got plenty of other things we can work on that we don't have to do that. An example being, like, I have a student who I put some beans on the floor and handed her a broom to see if she could sweep. And she just started marching around with the broom, and she was doing other things with it, right? So maybe it's like interest, but she's not going to sweep for me at this moment in time. So I can work on something else that I want her to do instead. So we're going to watch this video, and we're going to think about what's the student's interest level. Does it need to be structured for independent or direct instruction? What's their comprehension level? And does it need to be adapted? So this is the raw materials that we just put in front of the student. Make sure the sound is on. Oops.
ABC
Okay, what would we score that one? A pass, an emerge, or a fail? Emerge? Maybe a pass? So it's a fidget, right? We're not putting a lot of expectations on him. We're just checking to see is there interest there. But there happens to be letters on all of the bubbles. So what else did we learn about him? He knows his letters. He knows his ABC song. So that's something that we would create for independent because it's of high interest for him and it's a skill he has. So we just need to put a clear beginning and end to it. So that it looks like this. So we marked it as a pass to create for independent. And here's what we did was they put letters in a cup on the left. So he's going to grab the letter, pop that letter, and then put the card with the letter on it on the right. So now a fidget that is unstructured in the sense that there's no beginning or end, it now has a clear beginning and end. So they grab a letter, pop it, put it in the right. So some activities might take you a while to create, but something like this wouldn't take very long, right? It's just a couple of cups, some letters, and then they glued down the poppet. Or maybe it's Velcro down. I don't know. It somehow is down there. Yeah. So that's how you take something from your informal assessment and put it into a structured activity with a clear beginning and end. When we create activities, we want to make sure we have one goal per activity. I think sometimes we get overzealous and think like an activity can be so many things, and then we've lost the point of it, or we've overwhelmed the student. So we want to make sure we have one goal. We want to make sure we have enough visual to support what we're teaching. So making sure that they can focus in on what it is that we want them to know. Think about how you can extend it over time. So, what can it look like later so it's not one and done, like your file folders? What does that look like next? Include the student's interests for motivation and have visuals that support the student's independence. So, as we start diving into different activity examples, this is a task you can get from shoeboxtasks.com. Great idea in the sense that you can get these structured activities already made for you. You can order them and they show up. And basically all you have to do is put it together and set it up. So if we're looking at skill acquisition versus errorless learning, what is the skill that this activity is trying to teach? So there's numbers 1 through 5. We've got beads. What do we want them to do with the beads? Count, right? We want them to count the beads. The one issue I have with this activity is that they're not really required to count. They basically are just putting them on the rods until there's no more room, right? And then they move on to the next rod. So we actually don't know if they have that skill or they just know how to do this activity. So how could you change it to make it so that we can really see if they have this skill? Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Make all the rods the same size. And then that really tells us if they can count them out. Another thing I would consider is having all of those numbers Velcroed on so you can switch around the order. Our students are very accustomed to counting in numerical order or even going in alphabetical order. So having it more random will really force them to have to pay attention when they're counting. How about this one? The skill we are also trying to teach is counting in quantities. Is it teaching that? No. Yeah, so it's just one-to-one essentially, right? They're just matching on the Velcro dots till there's no more room. So how could we change it to make it so that we are working on quantities?
I was just going to say have a strip instead of the dot.
Yeah, Velcro dots are expensive. Save those. Use the strips. The strips will tell us, you could even put them in a cup. A cup could also serve the same purpose. So we just want to be mindful of those visual cues that we are giving. There's nothing wrong, to be clear, with this task. It's not necessarily working on counting. So here's some different examples. Here on the top left is a self-correcting activity. So this particular student is working on activity completion. So they're just taking something from the left and putting it on the right. And it's self-correcting in the sense that the bracelets don't fit down the tube and the ring won't fit around the tube. So really it's the only thing they can do with it. So for those students that you're not really sure where to start, this could be, self-correcting might be a good one to start with them because it really keeps it errorless for them. Down here is something as simple as like materials you already have. So you don't have to go and buy a bunch of materials. So you can just use what you have. So this is just pencils, eraser tops, and a finished bin on the right. So you're going to take out a pencil, put on the eraser, put it in finished. And they're going to do that until all the pencils are gone. What we're not going to do is take the pencils out, undo it in front of them, and make it do it again. There's a couple reasons for that. One, how frustrating would that be for any of us if you just completed something and then somebody just went and undid it all? So then you got to do it again. It's like my kids in their laundry when I put it away and then they like pull a certain shirt that they want to get out and then the rest is on the floor. So that's something that we have to be mindful of. So that creates frustration. The other thing is that we want them to have that concept of finished because we're trying to get that buy-in, right? We want them to work. So if they see like I just have to do this amount of pencils and then this activity is done and it's out of the way, that's a skill and a tool that we can use, right? This one on the right is those cutting the Velcroed fruits and vegetables. So they have like a little cutting board in the middle and then they put them in the separated on the side. They also have that added visual cue of green to start and red to stop. This was kind of a fun one in a sensory area that I took in a classroom. So those squigs, that stick together and they stick to the windows and things like that. So when the students show up, all the squigs are attached onto the whiteboard, and so they have to pull them off and color sort them into the color matching cups. So it's just something to do. They still get that input, but it provides more clarity as to what they do with it versus just playing with them nonstop. It's clear beginning and end. Matching and sorting, and this is again at that object level, but it's with picture direction. So it's object and picture. So they're going to pick up a ball or a car and they're going to drive it down the right chute. One thing to note on this one on the left is there's a piece of cardboard in the middle to divide it. That's to be able to go back and check if they did it right. So once they've worked one-on-one with you and now they're practicing it in independent spaces, you want to be able to go back to see if they did it. So that will provide that clarity for you. So even if you have like bins where things disappear, you want to be able to go back and check. Another piece is like this one on the right, working on those pre-voc skills. For our academy, we have lots of different manufacturers that hire our graduates. And so one of the things they have to know how to do is like sort nuts and bolts. So here they have them assembled, and then so they'll unscrew them and sort them into the right pieces and put them on the right. Here is an activity. So if you're saying to yourself, like, Caroline, I don't have time to make all of these activities and individualize them all. What am I supposed to do? Here's an idea. So these are what I call good bones activities. So they're activities that can become multiple things. So for this particular one, you just need foam board, Velcro, and 2 containers. And then you can have them matching anything. So right now, these are characters that the student really likes. So they take a card with a matching picture like Cookie Monster, they're gonna match Cookie Monster, and then put it to the bin on the right. And they're gonna make all of those matches, and then they know the activity's done. You could also use this to match pictures, letters, numbers. You could even do things like addition problems where they pull the card, it's got the addition problem, they've got to find the answer. This can become multiple things. So that's where like your time saving is that your activities can be more than one thing if you have these good bones ones. Here's another good bones activity, working on sorting objects. This is by sports, but you can sort by color. You can sort a variety of different things as well. This is a fun one for your students that they're beyond activity completion, like moving something from the left and putting it to the right, but they're not quite at matching and sorting yet. But they're tactile learners. This could be a concept sort. So they pull something out of the bag and they feel, is it wet or is it dry? And then they're going to move it into the picture that says wet or dry. And then graduating that, so if extending it, it could just be the word. Do they know how to read wet and do they know how to read dry? So one thing too, it was pointed out to me that there are some teachers here where your students are visually impaired. And so I definitely want to make sure that we are hitting stuff that you're able to do at home, back in your setting. So are there some ways when you're looking at these activities that maybe you might edit it to work for your particular students? This might be a good time to share with everybody so that you can problem solve together. I know I'm saying visual, 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 but for some of your students that's not necessarily always an option. So I don't know if like tactilely, like this would be an option. So if there's any pointers that you would give or ways that you would adapt things, like please share, because this is a nice opportunity to be able to work with your peers and problem solve some of these things. So is there anything? You have something?
I was going to say anything right now. So for my VI students, I use, the dots, the dice that you buy from the dollar store, the Dollar Tree.
Okay.
I physically put what are those? The tactile paint, the puff paint for numbers. And then we use base 10 blocks to match that. So they roll the dice, teach them the concept of rolling, so they're able to see the same number, and then matching the number. So
Oh, that's great. So did everybody hear that? So she buys the dice from the dollar store and puts puffy paint on the dots so that they can feel them, and then they use base 10 blocks when they're rolling the dice and counting and putting out numbers and things like that. Great.
I think a lot of these activities can be done with that, but maybe with real objects. So instead of dry and wet, I might have an object that's dry and an object that is wet, and so they still do the same activity, but they're matching objects versus the words.
Yeah, so she was saying that a lot of these activities would work. We just make it more tactile. So instead of having pictures saying dry and wet, you'd have the actual objects themselves that are wet and dry for them to be able to feel, to know how to sort. Anyone else?
Something like this, you could do it by size. You could have bigger towels and smaller towels.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Soft towels and scratchy.
So this is like a good bones activity. You could do it with different sizes, big and small. What else did you say? Different textures, or like hard and soft, maybe loud and quiet for some of our students. Anybody else? Were you in the back? Yep.
rough and smooth, because we do a lot of textures. We find materials, like now it's fall, so we'll go out and find fall leaves and let them feel the texture of the leaf.
Yep.
And then either paint, they have to feel the paint. Some of our students are unable to paint because of allergies, so we find other ways to incorporate those materials for them.
Yeah, so really making the manipulative speak to your students, whoever you're working with. And that's, I think, universally what we're always trying to do is to find that right manipulative that's going to work for our students. I think I even have smooth and bumpy. Oh, next one. Right here. I have smooth and rough, but you would actually have the objects themselves that they would feel first as they're opening up the baggies to sort. Great. And this is a reminder that activities, this is like where the fun comes into play. I know I'm bashing file folders today, but I think file folders are boring. We can make it really fun and engaging for our students. So something like this, the student's really into basketball, so we're working on basketball addition. So they pull the different numbers out of the pocket to make the addition problem, and then they're going to answer them in the basket. And then there's also a number line on top if they need extra support too. And then when it comes to reading, so I do have some adapted books up here that might need some extra adaptations depending on who your students are. And we can kind of work through that together when we do our make and take. But here's some examples of adapted books. I know we have students that love books, but they kind of just skim through, or maybe they're non-readers. So, how can we make it more meaningful for them? Again, providing a clear beginning and end to it too.
Early words, Richard Scurry. I am a little bunny. My name is Franny. Franny likes to play with toys. Can you find a toy? Oh, this is my room. This is her bed. I brush my teeth. How do I get up?
So now we're giving a little more purpose to a book. So even if you think about if you're doing read aloud, How do your students know how long the book is if they've never heard the story before? How do you maintain their attention? So maybe they have those pictures that they're going to match or objects that they're going to put on the book so that as you turn each page, there's something to do there. So for our non-readers, we can give them something else to do when they're manipulating a book. Here is Emily again. She's doing some reading with our Ready to Learn curriculum.
I eat the pancakes.
Bless you.
I eat the donuts. I eat the yogurt.
So you can see that she's matching here with the picture and the word. So she's getting used to, she's got to scan the 3 words and find the right matching word. The next level we'll see coming up is that she doesn't have the word that matches. So she's matching just the word to the picture.
The boat. The airplane. I see the car. I see the train.
So again, thinking about different levels and what's the next level from one thing, how does it extend to something else? How do we know that they really understand what the word means? All right, and then here's something for a group read aloud. Reading The Grouchy Ladybug.
It was night, and some fireflies danced around the room. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the sun came up. A friendly ladybug flew in from the left. It saw a leaf with many aphids on it. At 6 o'clock, it met a yellow jacket. Hey, you, said the grouchy ladybug. Want to fight? If you insist, said the yellow jacket, showing its stinger. Oh, you're not big enough, said the grouchy ladybug, and flew off.
Spoiled brat.
Right. It's a bee.
So now they can see on the poster that's up there how many pages they're going to read because that's how many animals they're going to match.
Hey, you, said the grouchy ladybug. Want to fight? If you insist, said the stag beetle, opening its jaw. Oh, you're not big enough, said the grouchy ladybug, and flew off. Emily.
So again, we're providing a clear beginning and end for our students so they understand what the expectations are, that once all those pictures are matched, that they're done with the book. Okay. And then this is a video. So this is a elementary school principal. And they did this big project in their book room, which I'll let her speak to. But they essentially over the summer had teachers come in. It was a separate grant that they did to make adapted books. And I'll let her talk about it.
Really important to give our self-contained teachers areas to store their stuff. And it also makes sense to create an inclusive environment, not just for our students, but our staff. And so every elementary school has a book room. So we then created an area for adapted books. And all the teachers can check out. We have word match, picture match, and then comprehension skills. But then we created adaptive books with our general education curriculum. And we use Lucy Calkins, so we bought all of those books for our self-contained teachers. And so we have structured books at all of the different levels and different comprehension questions. So an example is they're going to be reading Snowflakes in the first grade classroom. They can take this in the self-contained classroom or the general education classroom, be reading the same book as the kid next to them in the first grade classroom, and be answering some of the comprehension questions to the side. And they're reusable.
So that's just a nice way to, when we're thinking about inclusion, which we'll get to in a little bit, so that our students don't feel so singled out as they're coming in. They're already coming in usually with another staff member, so they already feel maybe a little bit different. But if they can be reading the same material, even if they're doing something adapted, it creates a more inclusive environment for them. And so I think this is like a really nice way to do that, is even including within the general curriculum, they're still doing the same things. This is a reading activity that we did over the summer for a student that loves bowling. So every bowling pin, which was just made on pill bottles, they would bowl and knock down the letters, and then under here, they're writing words. They're creating words with the letters that were knocked down. So that just is something to add some interest with what they're doing. So another reading activity, again, this is very flexible, so thinking about your vocabulary words or whatever, power words you're working on that week or that month, how do we make it flexible? So again, this is just a box top and a cup, and then these are handwritten words and pictures. So it doesn't always have to be a lot of time that you put into these activities. Some of it can just serve its purpose. So all of these can be Velcroed on, so you can increase or reduce the field that they're matching the picture to the word. Here's one where they're identifying misspelled words, so they're going to circle it. Here's a different type of counting one. So we saw the one where they were, I said that we can move it to cups instead of matching to Velcro strips. So for this student, they love soccer, so we had soccer ball erasers, and they're just going to count and match the right number into each of these containers that have the amount listed on them, and everything is Velcroed on, so they're never in the same place twice. So it moves around, so the student has to scan and find the right answer. Uno cards, always a useful tool. You can do color sorting with them. You can even do addition with them or subtraction. So for this one, the student opens it up, and they've already got the math problems on there, and so they're just going to add or subtract and write the answer underneath. But again, this is very flexible. It's different each time. I know sometimes with the box tops, we're like, I don't have storage for that, so here's a file folder activity, but it's different each time they see it. Here's another one for math, working on the dollar up skill. So it's got written directions of what that means. So they're going to pull out a picture that has a price on it, and then they're going to find the right amount of money, and they're going to stick it into one of the pockets. This is a picture example. One of our trainers, she's a kindergarten teacher, and they use Eureka Math curriculum. I don't know if that's one that you all use or not, but this is a bin, and it'll progress through. You can see all these envelopes. So those envelopes look like this. So it's each math skill that she's working on. So she took the curriculum and cut it up and made it so that it could be used more as a manipulative with two bins they have on the right side, so they're working on the skill there. Here's another example. So like addition with visuals. So they'll pull the card that already has the numbers on it, add it, find the answer, and put it to the right. So this is ways that you can incorporate the required curriculum as well. This is still that Eureka Math for a particular student. He was refusing to do the visuals and the lessons that were given to him. So what she did was she cut everything up, and then she moved it into, so it was a clear left to right, so you could see that sign of finished, and here's him completing it. So maybe even a card like that, we could add those Velcro dots so that they are more tactile for a student that needed that extra support to be able to count along and find the right number, maybe with puffy paint numbers, so that they could feel that too. Here is a science activity where the student, the vocabulary word that they gave was that we're going to work on a reaction and what a reaction means. And so there's 3 different clear liquids that the student's going to put baking soda in and see if it bubbles or not, and then marks if it does. So he's got the baking soda. He's going to put it in cup C, which then it must be vinegar, so he's getting that reaction. Versus I think the others were like water and soda. So you can see he's really enjoying it. And then the question under there is, did it have a reaction? And he circles yes or no. There's a coloring one here on the left, so if you're creating an art center or something like that, they could have all the crayons to the left of them. They're going to color in the sheet, and then they put it in the container on the right, so again, providing a clear beginning and end to it. And here's a Play-Doh one. So first we'll watch Emily doing an assessment when she has Play-Doh and no structure with it, and then what it looks like after structure's added. So not really doing much, like manipulating a little bit, but just kind of hanging out. Get her out of a swing. So here they've structured Play-Doh a little more for her, so she knows what's expected of her. So there are cookie cutter shapes in the bin on the left that were copied, the shape, and so the shape was cut out and put on that board there. So she'll get one thing of Play-Doh. And then she's going to cut out using each shape from the Play-Doh, and then she'll put the cutout shape on the board and then the cookie cutter on the right. So then she knows how many she's got to do to keep going. So again, providing that visual clarity with a clear beginning and end. So you'll see her match the heart to the heart. And then she'll move on to the next shape and keep going. Here's a music one. If you have any students that like to listen to the same song over, or part of a song over and over and over again, this one just has them do a little bit more with the music, so they've got to listen to the song and they give it a rating. I know it's kind of hard to see with the glare on the screen, but like 1 star is this song is horrible versus 5 stars is I love this song. So they have to listen to each song and then give it a rating. And this one is a movement one. So this one on the left is tabletop basketball. So on the card it says take a shot, and that has a strip of tokens. And so the student's going to shoot the basketball into the hoop. And then they're going to take a token and mark if they made it or if they missed it. So they know they get to take like 6 shots, I think is how many tokens are on there, or 7. And then once all the tokens are matched and made it or missed it, then the activity is completed. And then here's a video here, it's hidden. This is Teddy, again with his parents at home. Dad really wanted him to play catch, and that's something we hear a lot, is it seems like it's this basic thing, like why can't you just play catch? And here's the assessment. So he doesn't really know what he's supposed to do. So if we think again about that social reciprocity piece, that back and forth exchange, he doesn't understand what catch is, that you throw it and I throw it. He also doesn't know for how long he's supposed to be doing it for. And he just goes in for a hug. So something that Teddy likes is puzzles. So what they did was they gave Teddy, he's got a foam puzzle board in front of him, and Mom has all the puzzle pieces, and there's a piece of Velcro on the ball. So Mom will roll the puzzle piece to him, he takes it off, puts it on the board, and then he rolls it back and gets another one until the board's completed. If you don't want to use puzzles, you could use picture cards, you could use any sort of manipulative to put on that you fill something so that they know how many times they are going to be playing catch. Somehow getting hung up, so I'll just walk through as we can see it. So this is a movement activity for a student that really loved yoga. And so this just provided some visual clarity of what poses she's going to do on the left side and for how long she's going to hold it for. And then when we do social skills, we want to capitalize on top of skills that they already have. So like, for example, if your student knows how to color match, then you could do something like Candyland, right? Because they already know how to color match. If your student does not know how to color match, then you would not want to do Candyland, because that is what they do, is they go to those colors that match on the card. So we want to make sure it's skills that they already have. So for this particular one, the student, she loves yoga, and she can do it independently. So we made it a social game, and we made it Yoga Twister. Which was actually really fun to play. So she would spin, and then she would have to hold a certain pose, depending on, and we had like a 10 count on there. And then somebody else would do it next to her, which she thought was hilarious. And then, so something like gym class, which can kind of be loud, and not always necessarily fully structured, that works for our students. So I worked with a gym teacher, and we made colored zones in the gym. So one zone was cardio, one zone was stretching, and one zone was strength. So when they went to those colors, then they had visuals of what it was they were supposed to do in those spaces, and these all Velcroed on. Things like sensory, so we saw Emily with the Play-Doh, but then also on the bottom right here is like that Mad Matter kinetic sand that students can dig through and find a manipulative, and then they're going to color soda into the right matching cup. So then again, providing a clear beginning and end. So then we move on to social skills. Social skills are something that I think oftentimes we jump into turn-taking right away because we think that's the social level that we want our students to be at. There are many students that are not there yet. They oftentimes are stuck at that sharing level, just learning how to share materials. Some students might not even be at sharing yet. They're still at parallel play, where they're like in the same space at the same time. Especially for our younger students that have never been in school before, this might be where they're at. So we can't always jump into turn-taking right away. So here's a progression of memory of how that can look at the different leisure levels. So we have parallel play, social, or sharing, turn-taking, and then rule following. So this first one for memory, the students are just doing the same thing at the same time, but they're not required to interact with each other. So they're both taking a memory card and just putting it into square on the board. So it's not your traditional memory following those rules. They're just taking these cards and putting them in, and then once their board is full, that activity is done. And they're just doing it at the same time. Versus these students are sharing the board in the middle. So this is the sharing level. They still have their own cards, and they're not dependent on the other person to finish the game. They're just filling the cards onto the board. So they're sharing that board. And then here is where we can work on turn taking because they've met those other milestones where they are sharing the board and then they have the cards in a container. And you can see there's a weight symbol on there, so if it's not their turn, weight is showing up. And if it is their turn, the basket covers up the weight symbol. So they're going to take a card and they're going to put it onto the board. Still not playing traditional memory, still adapted. And then they pass the bin back over for that student. So it is dependent on the other person to complete the game. And then the next video, which isn't showing up, is just your traditional memory following rules with some visuals. So now if we break down, so here as sharing, if we're structuring a sharing game, they share the Lego in the middle, but they have their own Legos as they're stacking a tower. Here's one where they're sharing water in the middle, and they just get to drop stuff in and watch it like sink, float, splash, but not dependent on one another. They're just sharing the water. So another easy one to set up with 2 bins, whatever manipulatives you can find, and a clear bucket in the middle. So if you have students that when it comes to turn taking and they don't want to take a turn because they want to have specific pieces, it might be because they're still at that sharing level. They have to figure out how to share first before they can move on. And then here's another video of sharing. These are 2 brothers. So we saw Jason earlier, and then this is his twin brother, Lucian. Lucian starts with all the cars, and he shoots it down one chute, and it goes into Jason's bucket, and then he shoots it down the other chute. Whoop. And then it disappears into that green box. So they keep playing with the cars until they're all gone. This is Emily playing with her sister. They found when they did assessment that she really liked those I Spy cards. So this is similar to what we saw with the memory where the basket's in front of her of the card. And this is similar to an activity that we have offered for you to make today. So for this particular one, you would take a basket with regular playing cards, and then the basket would be passed back and forth, and then there's the matches along here that they would match the card inside, whether by suit or we also have it by number, is something that you can make today. Here is a fun one for rule following. This is a student that can color match, and she really likes bugs. I should stop trying. So there's all different colored bugs here, and the fly swatter is what tells her if it's her turn or not. So she's going to swat a bug. So the red bug is then going to match to a red card, and then it goes into finished. And then she takes turns by passing the fly swatter. Even if she's reluctant to take turns, she knows she has to finish the game. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mic it, but she's very interactive with it. She won't give up. Okay, and then we have one more video. Actually, we'll skip that one, and I'll come back to it while we're doing make and take, just so purposes of time. Okay, so from social skills, then we jump into communication a little bit. This is actually a whole hour-long lecture that I do on communication. I love talking about communication. It is really fun to be able to really unlock with our students, when we find the right form, comprehension level of where they're at. It's really engaging and fun. So when the base of the pyramid is set, so we've got our environment, we have our schedules, we have our to-do lists and our activities, that receptive understanding is there for our students to know what's expected of them. So then we can build that relationship with them, and they're ready to communicate expressively. So we really focus on getting that, it's for long-term independence. We want the communication that is spontaneous, meaning it's not prompted, and directed, that it's directed to somebody. Like, that's the goal, that's the dream. So that's really what we work towards when we're creating activities. The 3 things that we think about when we're doing our communication assessment, and this is from a structured teaching standpoint. This isn't to say that what your speech path is bringing in, like these are things that they're doing too, but when you're trying to figure out what you're gonna do in the classroom every day, if you don't have tools just yet, or if you're still getting up and running, these are things to think about. So the form, the purpose, and the context. So the form being how the student communicates, the purpose being why, and then the context, like who and where are they communicating. So first we'll watch, this is Teddy at Have Dreams. Let me just see if I can get in here. Try to reconnect so that. All right, well, here we go. So Teddy that we've seen at home is nonverbal. And let's pay attention, like what is his form for communication? So how does he communicate? How did he just communicate to the teacher what he wanted? Yeah. Gesture, touch, yep. He like grabbed them and like kind of, it was like motor basically, like just throwing her arm at it because this is what he wanted. What was the purpose behind it?
It looked like he didn't know how to get the sticker off.
Yeah, he was requesting help. Yeah. He was requesting help by throwing her hand there. He wanted help with getting the stickers. And then the context would be in the classroom. So those are the things that we look at. And here's just one activity that was structured from that. So keeping with the stickers and requesting, so we kept that same purpose. We just changed the form that he was using to make it something that is more universal for like other classroom staff to know what it is that he wanted. So there's a communication shadow working from behind that he hands a sticker card to her, so then he gets a sticker. Then in front, on the sheet in front of him is dots, so he knows how many stickers he's going to be putting on. So instead of it being endless, we've again provided that visual clarity for how long the activity is going to be. So now when we're looking at spontaneous and directed communication, Barb keeps giving it her hand, which makes it prompted, right? So she should almost sit back and wait to see if he knows how to use that system. Does he know how to hand the picture over so he gets that sticker? So we've now changed the form just from gesture to adding a picture to make it more universal for other people to understand too. Here is from Teach Me Language, which is a really fun curriculum and program. This is working with Jason on word contingencies.
Wow. We're gonna play another game together.
Oh, that's a game.
Yeah. We're gonna have Christopher and Jason. Alright, I'm gonna think of a word. My word is yellow.
Oh, yeah. Yellow banana.
Banana! Absolutely.
see the visuals are there by color, so he knows when it's his turn because he says something in blue, and then Christopher says something in orange, or the other way around. So then it's visually clear that there's this back and forth exchange.
Oh, sure. Juice is cool. Definitely can be cool. When you say juice, it makes me think of.
Drinking.
When you say juice, it makes me think of.
Cool.
Spill.
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 I spilled.
Yeah, what do you think of when I say spill?
And your Bobby can be bad.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And your dad can be bad.
So this is a really fun warm-up activity too, that sometimes I will work with if I pull out students and things like that. This is something that they enjoy doing, just to get the conversation going, that back and forth, so it's not as awkward initially, kind of like breaks the ice a little bit. I'm going to show one more communication video, and then I want to make sure we have enough time for make and take, so as we're grabbing materials, I can keep talking through. So this is Timmy, and he's working on an interview.
What is your favorite music? I like country music. Country music?
So it's all what is your favorite, and in the circle is different pictures. So favorite music, favorite food, favorite book, favorite drink. And then again, it's visually clear. It's got set columns for whose turn it is to talk. So if you have students that like to dominate conversations, they get to say one thing, and then they have to listen to the response of the other person. And again, we're providing those visual supports of what's expected from them, how many questions they're going to have, and how many times they're going to listen. All right. So quickly, we're going to get into behavior. And just to kick it off, this is Tony, one of my most favorite students. He was getting called into the office daily for saying inappropriate comments. And so here's where we can't just assume a student knows something, we have to teach it. So here was an assessment that was done at Have Dreams after they had heard from the school.
Say something nice about Sue.
Listen, Sue, you look pretty good.
I look pretty good for what?
You look pale, Sue.
I do?
Yeah.
That's because, I think because I'm
How many lines do you have on your shirt there?
Well, that's got quite a few.
No, like 100.
Yeah.
Your hands are like gloves.
They are? Why do they look like gloves?
Because the skin is like so soft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does your skin, what does your skin feel like?
You can't really see it, but I know. It doesn't really.
So why do my hands look like this?
Because you're older.
Oh.
I don't know how old you are.
How old do you think I am?
I don't know.
Yes.
60.
60?
How did you get that bruise?
Well, the doctor, he had to help me, so he...
Where did you get that bruise from?
I got a bruise because when I was at the doctor, he was helping my hand, and I got a bruise. Well,
Where did you get it from? Did you hit yourself one time?
no, it happened when I was at the doctor.
How? What?
So an example of seeing like detail focus versus seeing the big picture, and he can't move on from it.
Oh, that looks pretty bad.
You think so?
Yes. You look very good yet. You still got a while to go. I don't want you to go ahead.
No, I don't plan on going to heaven anytime soon. Thanks.
I want you to.
Oh, thanks.
I'm not going to have until hundreds of years yet. You sometimes do when you get really upset.
What do I get upset about, Tony?
About me sometimes trying to play with a chair in your room,
Uh-huh.
classroom.
Yeah, and then what do I say?
It says, stop it.
Uh-huh.
And you yell.
Do I yell loud?
Yeah.
How do I sound when I yell?
I don't know. I don't think I have a voice usually, but you sound pretty loud.
But
Different glasses.
I should get different glasses?
Yeah.
Why? What's wrong with my glasses?
Because they need to be green.
They need to be green? I need green glasses?
Yeah, for sure.
What color shirt should I wear?
Green.
A green shirt and green glasses would make me look nicer?
Yeah.
So you don't like my yellow sweater?
No, but I really do. I'm just giving you a compliment.
I really do. I'm just giving you a compliment. I called you old. I said your fingers look like gloves, and I didn't want you to go to heaven yet. You need different glasses, different sweaters. You yell. So all those things, while they weren't terrible, I mean, our mind can go somewhere else of what our students could probably say. Still things that no one ever taught him, that you don't say things like that to an adult, right? You don't call an adult old, things like that. So that's where we really have to spell it out. So we really have to be mindful of that when it comes to behaviors. And here's that iceberg again. So the observable behavior being what happens above the waterline, and we really have to dive down underneath to figure out what's driving those behaviors we're seeing. So when I get called into classrooms for specific behaviors and challenging behaviors that we are experiencing, this is where I start. I draw a pyramid that you've already learned about today to figure out what supports are currently in place for this student in the environment, in their schedule, their to-do list, and activities. Once I do that, then I take a look at an iceberg. So what are we trying to shape? And what could be some of the antecedents that are driving that behavior we're seeing? Then I compare the two. So do you need to make a change in the environment, sensory-wise, change of furniture, more boundaries, less boundaries, visually changing it, proximity to certain people? I take a look at their schedule. Do they understand it? Did we miss the mark somehow? Do they have a bad routine with it? I take a look at their to-do list. Are there too many steps, or do they not understand it? And then thinking about activities. Have we found activities that are engaging for them, that are of their interest? Do we aim too high? Are we academically pushing them too hard and they're not ready to be there yet, or they're not successful with them yet? So that's really what I look to draw the connections. And then first you need to understand what's causing that behavior, and then you have to determine if the child can behave better but they're choosing not to, or they can't behave better because they don't have the skills to. So thinking about Tony, have we not taught him how to speak correctly with adults or properly, or something that works within our neurotypical culture, so that he's not offending people? And when it comes to behavior, you really have a choice to make. And the choice is where you decide to focus your energy. You can focus on the behavior, and as I said this morning, when you try to replace one behavior, it's like whack-a-mole, right? Another one pops up. So that doesn't always work. So something you might want to try is focusing on the antecedent. What's causing this behavior? What does this behavior, what function does it serve for our students? I think we already know collectively that focusing on the consequence really doesn't work. What I mentioned before when we're saying, what are you working for? What are you working for? And then they don't get it. Well, the consequence is then lost. Whether it's positive or negative, we still aren't getting them to work for something. So we really have to look at why aren't they working? What is it that we need to shift? This is an example of a student that was doing consult with one of our staff. They were working successfully, and one day he showed up, and the student did not want to work with him. He was hiding from him behind chairs. And they couldn't figure out why he wouldn't come out. And so finally Christopher wrote on a piece of paper, "I'm upset because." And the student wrote, "All Chris makes is Comic Sans. I hate them. Please change to Times New Roman." He hated the font that Christopher was using for their activities. So thankfully, he was able to advocate for himself and say, this is what I don't like about it. But sometimes it takes some time to unlock what is driving this behavior. And it could be something like that little detail that is bothering the student, but they haven't told us, and we don't know. When it comes to behavior, not only do we need to focus and teach the students the things that they cannot do, we need to give them ideas of what they can do. We can't just focus on that negative. We also have to give them ideas for what we want to see. Create those expectations. Self-regulation. So I know zones of regulation are really popular, and I don't mind the zones, other than for some students, I think there's a lot of zones. There's a lot of images, there's a lot of pictures, there's a lot of different feelings that can fall under certain zones, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint everything. And so this particular example is more individualized in the sense where the student needs to acknowledge, I'm at a 1, I'm at a 2, or I'm at a 3. When I'm at a 1, I'm happy, I'm working and I'm following directions. What can I do? Just keep working. When I'm at a 2, I might be crying, stuck on a particular topic, or yelling, so then a flap comes down, and I have choices of what I can do before we get to that level 3. So it's going to be individualized for each student, but to help getting them to recognize these things. This is for a particular student where we were getting some work refusal. His high interest was Sonic. So we tried to use that interest into what we were doing. So what does it look like when you're in control? And then instead of levels, they called acts. So when I'm calm and winning the act, here's what it looks like. Here's what I can do with it, versus getting off the course, versus falling into Dr. Eggman's trap. And then giving some examples of power-ups or choices of things that he can do that he might need. So really trying to get him to recognize where he's at and incorporating his interest. Here, sometimes when a student says, I need to take a break, it's kind of obscure because we don't really tell them what kind of break, or we don't really know what kind of break they need. So we can break it down. Do you need a quiet break, a movement break, or a sensory break? And they have options within that space of what they can do. This was for a particular student that they are working on a variety of different behaviors that involve some aggression, and parents had hit a point where they're like, he's going to have to go residential because he's hitting guests that come in the home and things like that. So the way they presented it was like a stoplight. So here's behaviors that cannot happen, here's ones that need work, here's ones we're doing well on, and so you can see the progression, and he could see the progression, move away from cannot happen to needs work and doing well. So we're really trying to help support them in all the behaviors that we're doing to see in a visual way of where they're at. Okay, I know I went really fast in behaviors, and I'm going to walk around and talk and problem solve too while you're creating activities. We have some time, so we'll need to set up the laminator and things like that, but here's activities that I have for you to create. The first one being an adapted Brown Bear book. I'm hoping that you have Brown Bear back at your setting because we are out of Brown Bear books, but I have the materials. So here, if you're doing a read aloud with the book, they would match the picture here. And it has 4 different levels. So you should make sure you grab 4 sheets because it's either a non-identical picture match, a clipboard match, a silhouette match, and then just the word. So there's different levels for the Brown Bear. And then there's also a Brown Bear game that you can do as an extension activity where these pieces all go on the file folder. And then the matching color you could put in a sensory bin, like rice or things like that, where they pull out the color and then they would match. So that can be a sharing activity or turn taking. I have going on a bear hunt. So this is the identical picture match. So as you're reading along, they would find the matching picture and then they would put it onto the book that way. And then the Old Lady series, so this is the old lady who swallowed a fly, so working on sequencing. So in order, what did she swallow? And so then this could also then become, like, since there's a whole series of them, you could have the other books too, all the holiday ones that they have. And then to build off of that, I also have my Old Lady. And so if you are doing read aloud again, there are the pictures, and then there's also just the words. So then they would follow along. She ate the bird, so you feed the old lady.
There's a Thanksgiving one too. She eats a turkey.
Yeah, there's all different holidays.
It's so gross, but it's great.
Yeah, so, but now, this is just, when you go to create it, it's just a piece of laminate that was run through and then clear taped. So it's really fun for the students to be able to watch it go down. So that's my Old Lady. I have an adapted Scrabble game. So here's player 1 and player 2, and these are all animals that they would spell the words. And they don't have to intersect, that's up to you. And they have 2 different levels, so one side's with the word, and one side's just the picture. And then they would put it into finish, so I have these pockets as well. Is that it? Oh, and then lastly, I have this game for the playing cards. But you don't have to just use playing cards. You could use Uno cards. You could use I Spy cards. You could use anything that's geared towards your students' interest. If you have those particular playing cards, I always have them at the dollar store. There's all different stuff that you can do for that. So I have all of those materials. And then additionally, I brought extra examples if you just want to take pictures of things. so you have those ideas. So this one is focusing on vocabulary words. So this is long A sounds, short A, or no A. And then you have different things to swap out with as well. So it's versatile. Here's some adapted books. Here's a book with like comprehension questions. And then even working on word sounds. Let's see. Well, I'll set it up so that you can take a picture properly, but then there's a picture run, so then they can make the word run, things like that. So all of that is here, and there are laminators to set up so that you can create, or you can just take pictures of everything, and I'll be here to talk through stuff if you have specific questions. There's scissors and Velcro, and then there's pockets, and then the laminators, I'll find a home to plug in, maybe over there. So let's see, how do we want to, let's do maybe this side of the room to come up first, and then we'll do that side of the room. I hope I have enough copies of everything. If we run out, let me know, and I'll email it to you so you can print it. I apologize. I never know how to anticipate how many people are going to take which activity.